Chapter 11, Abraxas. Curling columns of withered roots twisted and coiled in intricate patchworks across the cylindrical den of the Archon, each root tipped by a pulsing red barb like a scorpion's stinger. An undulating sea of thorns swirled around the Archon's bulb-like main body, an impenetrable web so dense it was unclear where the roots even began. They seemed to spill from the million tiny tunnels that perforated the den, but they also seemed to rise from the mire or extend from the base of the bulb. Trying to make sense of such a multifarious legion had little point. And yet Delaney teetered on the edge of the tunnel and peered into the seething mass in search of her companions. Poor Sloane and Winnipeg had simply disappeared beneath the tides, where who knew what fate befell them. Delaney sighed, tried to wear a concerned face. Even when nobody watched, she stressed the importance of appearances. If she forced herself to undergo the rote motions long enough, eventually they would form habit and then nobody, not even herself, would be able to tell her from the real thing. At least in this case she did have some genuine concern, if not for the well-being of her friends. Poor Sloane, she tried to tell herself, but their icy parting made it especially difficult, but for the defense of her allies. She needed their firepower. You can't heal something to death, unless it's one of those old-timey role-playing games where cures re-kill the undead. What an easy world if real life worked that way. No, stupid Delaney, what are you even thinking? Can't you demonstrate a shred of compassion? Sloane is probably being torn apart by those roots. Sloane's nice, isn't she? She didn't call you a freak or try to kill you, even after the Claudia story. That's way more kindness than a degenerate like you deserves. But if Sloane did die, Delaney would forget in a week. But that's not the point. Do good deeds, remember? That is the purpose of a magical girl, your purpose. That means saving people, even if they're total strangers. You can do it, Delaney. You can save them. I can save them! Delaney howled at the Archon. She sprinted off the edge and plunged into the thorny sea. Moments before she struck the top layer of roots, she tucked her legs under her chin in cannonball position and surrounded herself in a barrier. By folding up, she could minimize the barrier and emphasize its strength. Thus, when the barrier struck the roots, it did not pop, even as the thorns jabbed against it and pressed pointed indentations in the rubbery shield. She pinballed down the crevices between the roots, her body bouncing within the bubbly confines. She cartwheeled and rotated in air, quickly growing dizzy. She had low tolerance for these things. As she forced down nausea, she maintained the stream of magic necessary to maintain her barrier as it bashed against root after root, until the bubble ricocheted off something and fell freely until it hit a liquid surface with a wet slap. It was the lagoon. Under the canopy, roots were more sparse. Although not sparse enough to be unavoidable obstacles. She broke her bubble and instantly formed another beneath her feet as she resumed a standing position in one elegant motion. Beneath the canopy, the lagoon exuded an ominous anti-light that reflected the rippling motions of the roots above. The immense lower half of the Archon's bulb occupied most of the available space. Delaney had landed near the outskirts of the room, near the walls, and she quickly scanned the area for her hapless companions. It took only moments for a root to uncoil itself from the canopy and strike at her with the red-tipped barb. She was so preoccupied she did not even dodge, and the barb impaled her in the stomach. Silly Delaney. Always getting into trouble with your affable distractedness. You stupid fucking fuck. No time for self-loathing. The root yanked back and dragged her with it. The massive hole in her stomach felt so bizarre, a complete absence of guts, most of her intestines obliterated. Painless, of course. Just a weird physical emptiness. The root tried to pull her into the writhing mass above. Her body had risen halfway when she wedged her staff against the barb for leverage and unhooked herself. She healed the gaping hole in her stomach before she even hit the water, and she didn't hit the water because she summoned a flotilla of bubbles to catch her. Okay, time to get serious. She couldn't have massive plant appendages impaling her all the time, that would be quite inconvenient. Throwing up a barrier to defend her from another grasping root, she made graceful leaps from bubble to weave between obstacles and delve deeper into the den. Her first goal was to reconvene with her fellows. Then they could figure a plan to strike back. She soon encountered one of her dear companions, Winnipeg. The girl was engaged in fierce combat against the groping plant tentacles, hacking and slashing with her samurai sword. She bounced between the undulating appendages while severing others to drop flailing into the quagmire. Personal kerfuffles aside, Delaney respected Winnipeg's technical competence. Of course, Winnipeg's technical competence was the whole reason the incubator dragged her to the party in the first place. She had no further function than to provide offensive excellence where Delaney could not and Sloane could not yet, which Delaney had always considered something of an oversight, a flaw in the machine. It seemed Winnipeg could be employed more efficiently, or else remain uninvolved altogether. Especially since the Cubster had conspired behind their backs to include a fourth girl. Oh well. The incubator knew best about everything. Like always. Enough dallying. Stupid Delaney, you're only embarking on these pointless mental monologues to delay your assistance. Sucker awaits. She rode her magic carpet of bubbles to the battlefield and waved her staff to summon barriers around the more feisty-looking roots. Winnipeg, ignoring her, plunged deeper into the fray. She had adjusted her stroke and could now slice clean through a root with one fluid motion.
Hello, hello,
said Delaney.
I'm here to help. Where's Sloane?
Winnipeg lopped off the barb of a root that swooped in to strike, flipped over the resulting spray of pus, and ran along the root's toppling spine to cut down 2 more roots before they even got a chance to look at her funny. More roots dangled from the canopy to replace the fallen, and Winnipeg had soon returned airborne to close the gap. Perhaps you didn't hear me, said Delaney. Do you know where our dear Sloane's wandered off to? 4 more roots dropped one after another hack slash chop slice. Winnipeg paused for a moment atop a headless creeper and wiped her brow with the back of her hand. I'm busy. And off to whack more weeds. Delaney sighed and summoned a half-hearted barrier to defend herself from a root that had taken an unhealthy interest in her. There's no end to these roots, dear. We'll have to be more creative than simply attack if we want to do any direct damage to the Archon. Then get creative. I have not the luxury of standing still to ponder battle tactics. Roots fell as other roots emerged from the lagoon. The bulb in the center of the arena pulsed with the thousands of roots that fed it, pumping oil in thick, visible knots through the thorny veins. You know, said Delaney, if you helped me find Sloane, maybe we'd have enough firepower to free time for brainstorming, Winnipeg slashed another root and landed on yet another near Delaney, conspicuously foregoing the nice bubble Delaney had placed for her to use as a perch. I don't know where she is. We were separated. Thank you for answering in such a timely fashion. I'll simply have to find her myself. She broadcasted her thoughts to the airwaves. Sloane love, where have you gone? No use, said Winnipeg. She blitzed back into the battle. I already hailed both her and you. Unless you heard and simply decided not to respond, I believe the Archon is restricting the range of our telepathy.
Ooh,
Delaney said.
What an interesting power. Our Archon appears to have a whole goodie bag of neat mental tricks. So much more fun than the boring old brute in Saskatoon.
Winnipeg continued to hack roots despite the tedium and obvious pointlessness of the endeavor. She should give up, just like Delaney was going to give up the tedium and pointlessness of attempting conversation with a brick wall. Why waste the energy, when she had a Sloane to save? When she turned to continue her search, however, she discovered that many more roots had sprouted from the liquid below, a dense jungle of vines as thick as tree trunks.
Winnipeg, I recall Cube informing me you had some sort of massive AoE finisher attack.
AoE?
No silly, AoE, area of effect. Don't you know anything?
The point of a finisher is that it finishes. I must ensure it slays the foe, else I will be too drained to fight. Yeah. But after enough of these roots they'd be tuckered out anyway. Delaney could maintain a bunch of weak barriers for a long time or a few strong barriers for a small time, but eventually even she went kaput. Her last dance with an Archon had been a dicey affair, so if possible she'd prefer to preserve her strength the second time around. Finding a weak point now instead of dithering with saplings unto infinitum would go a long way. She observed the battlefield again and racked her brains. Massive and impenetrable main body of the Archon, okay. Obviously they needed the bulb to bloom and reveal something inside. But physical attacks refused to dent the tough exterior shell. What else did the bulb have? The roots. But they had destroyed millions of roots by now, okay, maybe like 50, without a single shift in the bulb's demeanor. Not that bulbs have demeanor. You know what she meant. The bulb both respired and perspired the black oil that flooded the lower reaches of the den. Considering the new wraiths the Archon created were born in the sweaty beads that bubbled through the epidermis, Delaney conjectured the oil was the energy source the Archon recycled endlessly to work its photosynthetic processes, with water substituted for oil and darkness, substituted for light. Ergo. Co2 plus, C8H18 becomes wraiths plus hatred. Which meant if they cut the roots feeding it, they could at least disrupt it. However, the roots were replaced instantaneously, making the task unfeasible. But wait. Removing the receptacles was but one option. What if they removed the elements of the equation itself?
Winnipeg. Let's drain the pool,
said Delaney. Winnipeg did not reply. Maybe she did not hear. Oh, well. Delaney directed her bubbles to ferry her clothes enough to the lagoon to stoop and slide her staff through the murky liquid. It stuck to the red jewel at the top of the scepter and dribbled down the shaft, eventually pooling atop her hand. She sniffed it, drew back from the sour odor. It had a thicker consistency than water but overall demonstrated no spectacular properties. The conundrum of draining the lagoon was mere logistics. Pumping mechanisms were out of the question, as the bulb could pump liquid out of the pool in immense quantities without depleting it, assuming the chemical reaction occurring inside the Archon diminished the total amount of oil, which made scientific sense but not, she supposed, magical sense. A drain, perhaps using one of the tunnels that already ringed the den, was a more technologically feasible option, but it would take a long time for the liquid to siphon completely. Winnipeg had wind magic, perhaps they could suck up the liquid in a massive vortex, seal it into a bubble barrier, and dispose of it all at once. But that would require extreme magical exertion on both Delaney and Winnipeg's part. The placid surface of the pond broke and the static shrouded head of a wraith emerged, a single hand groping for her. With nary a thought, she brought her spiked ruby heel down on its head, boring it where its eye should be and sending it sinking back into the mire. Wait a second. If it really was oil.
Winnipeg.
She looked up. Winnipeg's status remained unchanged, perpetual and fruitless warfare.
Winnipeg, are you perchance a smoker?
Is that more combat jargon you wish to berate me for not knowing?
No, silly, I mean as in cigarettes. Personally, I can't stand what tobacco does to my teeth, but
I find smoking repulsive.
I figured you might say that. Oh well. Do you think Sloane smokes? This isn't idle chit-chat, by the way, I have a practical purpose for asking.
Winnipeg removed 2 more roots. Did she never tire? I have not once witnessed Fargo smoking. Another wraith emerged from the swamp near Delaney. Or maybe the same wraith. She kicked it again for good measure.
Yeah, but we've really only known her for less than a day. She strikes me as a smoker, honestly. It would match her aesthetic.
No response. Delaney scrunched her mouth. She wished Winnipeg would just say when she was done with a conversation instead of aborting it entirely. Like, okay, Delaney had done some not nice things to her, and in fact part of her plan had been for Winnipeg to specifically dislike her, and like Sloane instead, but really. Basic communication, girl. If Delaney could overcome the swollen nothingness inside herself to engage in social etiquette that almost brought her literal physical pain, Winnipeg could at least reciprocate. Like honestly. What hardships did Winnipeg even have? Boo-hoo, she didn't love her ex-boyfriend or whatever that story was. And she acted so entitled, so pretentious. It would be so easy for Delaney to summon a barrier right in front of Winnipeg's path. She imagined the bubble deflecting Winnipeg, knocking the momentum right out of her, the little body losing its grace and control and bouncing hopelessly toward the murk. The barbs of the roots pouncing, impaling her from multiple sides at once, ripping her body apart. Avenging their severed brethren by severing her limbs and head, devouring the worthless torso like so many serpents. No, Delaney. Stupid, stupid, stupid. She knocked a fist against her head, reveling in the dull thunk that signified a brainless skull. Stop thinking such psychotic things, you dolt. Think about good things. Like how happy all 3 of you will be when you defeat the Archon. She squeezed her eyes shut and imagined the scene, but no matter how she tried, she could not muster the same detail and relish as her fantasy of Winnipeg's grisly death. The 3 of them stood as sketchy figures in a plane with no background, cardboard cutouts more than people. If she removed herself from the image, things got a little easier, but not enough. The same wraith from before wrapped a slimy claw around her ankle. She bashed in its cranium with her staff. Time to spark her dumb self into action and find Sloane. Bubbles, away. They skittered over the oil lagoon in unified motion, taking her along for the ride. The den was a deceptively expansive space. The various roots emerging throughout the swamp gave it a sylvan appearance, like narrow tree trunks along empty dale. The wiggling thorns had an odd optic effect, cutting unusual zigzag forms through what should have been a plane of parallels and perpendiculars. It made it hard to focus. The roots had a hypnotic sway, a kind of entrancing dance as they pumped fuel to the core. Could this be another of the Archon's perception-altering powers, or simply crazy old Delaney acting a little loopy again? Let's go with the former. She rattled her empty brains with another good knock.
Sloane love!
She shouted. She cupped her hands to her mouth and shouted again.
Sloane love!
Her voice echoed through the wobbly space. She tried to find a better word than space to describe it, but her surroundings seemed less and less to reflect any real-world concept or geography. What had she likened it to, again? A forest? No, nothing like that. She squinted her eyes and tried to force the vertical and horizontal and diagonal lines into focus, but they were just lines, just forms, jittering back and forth devoid of meaning, becoming Mondrian, becoming Pollock, Jackson, not Delaney. This was actually kinda difficult. She slowed down her bubble raft and leaned over to catch a breather. Disorientation immediately took her and she lost sight of which way was up. She found out when she bent over to vomit. What felt like all her guts streamed from her mouth and plopped into the black pool, leaving her an empty husk of skin with nothing inside. A painful cramp in her voided stomach caused her to kneel and grab at herself with both hands. She spat out the acrid backwash and clenched her teeth, wiping her lips with the back of one hand before another painful cramp doubled her over again. What was going on? This couldn't be just a reaction to the motions of the roots. Her response had been too visceral to be based solely in imagery. But what? The root. The one that had impaled her. She had assumed her magic could counteract the venom. Had that been overconfident? Nothing else had touched her. It was the only way the Archon could affect her so strongly. Then why did she not see some strange flashback of critical events in her life, like Sloane did? Why did she not see Claudia or the dog or her stepfather or anything except a nightmarish terrain of fragmentary lines and colors? A small creature appeared beside her and she raised her hand to strike it before she realized it was the incubator. Still clutching one arm tight to her stomach, she tried to ask what he was doing there, but her mouth had turned to cotton and her tongue had swollen with bile. She lowered her hand on the incubator's head. All he did was stare at her, but her fingers passed through and dipped into the oil where he sat. An illusion. A hallucination, a byproduct of the venom coursing through her veins. But why him? Of all the terrible lousy things from her past, why the one thing with which she could on some level actually identify, and on another maybe even respect? If she had to sum up her relationship with the incubator, that was it: benign, grudging respect. She certainly felt nothing so strong toward him as to merit his appearance in her delusions. The cracks in the world around her sharpened with encroaching menace. She had a dull recollection of a parallel universe of roots and swamps. Her addled brain fired muted messages of danger through her nerves. She had to purge the toxins before the Archon took the opportunity to destroy her. She brought her teeth to her wrist and clamped deep into the artery. Sickly brown blood seeped, then sprayed, over her dress. She gnawed deeper into the vein, her blood propelling out in a voluminous arc. A harsh crack in the world came crashing down on her. She barreled to the side and plunged into the tar, forcing herself under the surface despite the buoyancy that tried to push her back up. Her wrist continued to hemorrhage chunky globules of bilious plasma. The cracks and lines followed her underwater, even as the black oil stung her eyes and should have rendered all sight inoperable. All she needed was for enough blood to leave her that the effects would wear off, and then she could replenish her supply with simple magic. She applied pressure with her thumb to expel the blood faster. The incubator swam along in the murk, his fur remaining pure white despite the unctuous ooze around him. Why the incubator? Why not Claudia? What was this hallucinogenic venom supposed to show? More and more blood pumped out the frayed vein on her wrist. The incubator grew transparent, began to fade. She blinked, forcing the oil from her eyelids, and when she opened them again she saw only blackness. Phew. That was close. The first time she had ever felt herself in real danger during the entire expedition. She supposed it wouldn't be a good Archon romp without at least one near-death experience. Still submerged, she quickly filled herself with nice, clean blood and sealed the wound on her wrist. Unsure how far beneath the surface she had sunk, she began to swim upward. Except something had snagged on her ankle. She kicked her foot but the thing remained tight, a single thin strand like seaweed. She tried to unhook herself, but the liquid the consistency of molasses devolved all motion to awkward underwater ballet. She found it difficult to even find her foot. It felt as though she had a foot somewhere but it was not connected to the rest of her body. Her fingers groped the muggy dullness. Oil began to seep into her nostrils but she guarded herself against it with a convenient nosebleed. She should have put up a barrier before she submerged. Normally she had the presence of mind for that, but the sickness and the confusion caused a momentary lapse in clarity, again placing her in a more compromised position than she was used to. Was this how Winnipeg felt? Funny, considering to Delaney it all posed a minor inconvenience, and not an earth-shattering catastrophe. She gave up on finding her foot. The thing wrapped around her ankle was attached to something of weight, but it exerted no force beyond gravity, and even that was nullified by the buoyancy of the oil. Delaney propelled her arms and forced herself upward. She kicked her free leg and flailed and swam and had no idea if she made any progress at all. Something tugged on her scalp. It was her hair. Unlike whatever clung to her ankle, this force was actively pulling her upward. Her body began to rise, and continued to rise, and just when she wondered how far she had left to rise, she broke the surface. Air, functionally unneeded but welcome nonetheless, flooded into her windpipes as she sputtered oil. A single gasping breath as the rest of her body came sailing out the lagoon. She landed on her raft of bubbles, imagining herself like those birds in soap commercials who got trapped in oil slicks.
I can't see anything, she told her rescuer. You got oil in your eyes, said Sloane.
A hand pressed against her face. When it went away, she could see again. A miracle. A miracle of totally bland magic. And yep, she looked like a bird in a soap commercial. Oh dear Lord.
The hell happened to you?
Said Sloane. Her right arm dripped with oil.
I saw your bubbles and then ripples on the surface. Did you get the fuck? How did this get here?
She pointed to the thing clutching Delaney's ankle. It was a small human hand, attached to a small human arm, attached to a small human corpse. The corpse was similarly drenched, but vaguely recognizable as female.
Is this your friend Omaha? Said Delaney. No, Winnipeg found it. How did it get here, did it pull you under? Nonsense,
said Delaney. She pried the fingers from her leg.
It's a dead thing, it can't do that.
She gave the corpse an unceremonious push and watched it slowly sink beneath the surface. As the oil coagulated over Delaney's skin, she pulled herself to her feet and clapped her hands together.
Oh yes, before I forget. Sloane, you smoke, correct?
Sloane boggled at her. Her machine gun unleashed a salvo of unmanned fire to hold the roots at bay.
It's a simple question, love.
After a brief pause, Sloane adjusted her collar and turned away. She had to shift her boots carefully to keep atop the bubbles.
I can't afford to smoke.
Delaney pouted her lips and whistled, except her lungs convulsed and she bent over to hack up some coal-colored stuff. After a few pats on her chest for good measure, she spat cutely.
Patooey. You okay?
Sloane asked, more as a formality.
Dandy.
Delaney hooked a thumb onto her tongue and scooped out more of the bitter paste.
But this is really important, love. Are you certain you don't have a lighter, or matches?
Sloane waved her arm to redirect the aim of her gun. A disembodied root, fizzling at a sundered end, slapped against the lagoon.
I don't have jack shit. What's the purpose of this? I need you to help fight. There's too damn many of these things.
Oh, and her hair. She whipped the once white strands into a ponytail and wrung them over her shoulder.
Sloane dear, that's the problem I'm attempting to solve. Don't you know what oil does?
It took a few seconds for the realization to dawn on Sloane's face with comical eye widening. Sloane, you can be such a dunce sometimes.
Shit, she said. Shit, that's genius.
Sloane rifled through her pockets, her sullied arm smearing oil everywhere. Several upturned pockets later, she slumped her shoulders.
I got nothing. Oh, rats,
said Delaney.
And you know Winnipeg's so straight edge. Can't your light magic do anything?
The machine gun rattled.
It's just light, said Sloane. Random-ass magical light only loosely connected to the laws of physics. It gives barely any heat. Like, the tiniest amount.
Again the epiphany face, although this time Delaney hadn't the foggiest why as she puzzled in search of some alternative method to create fire, wondering if they could gather any sticks and dry brush to create it the Neanderthal way. Really, you would think something as elementary as fire would be easy peasy, or else drum up some hitherto subconscious magical power, or else attempt a chemical reaction to cause conflagration. The hemoglobin in her blood had the formula C2952H46640832N812S8Fe4, surely a reaction creating enough heat for Flashpoint was possible with enough ingenuity and magical chicanery. But she let Sloane say whatever it was she was going to say.
Give me your glasses, said Sloane. Why? Just do it, we don't have time.
Delaney fished into the folds of her filthy dress and found her similarly filthy glasses. Sloane snatched them and daubed a saliva-slicked thumb against the lenses.
Now paper or something like it,
said Sloane as she furiously wiped away oil.
I don't think I have anything like that,
said Delaney. She usually didn't even know where her civilian things wound up when she transformed into magical girl apparel. Sloane held the glasses to her eyes and squinted. She resumed wiping.
The map, gimme the map. The map.
The map.
Oh. The map.
She had kept the map of Williston in a safe place, partially to remember where it was and partially because she was paranoid of Winnipeg finding and destroying it, a paranoia that, in retrospect, sounded pretty silly. She daintily lifted a leg behind her and slid a finger into her ruby heel to pop it from her foot. Tucked snug under the insole were the folded pieces of her dear map.
Now tell me, love, what do you need this for? To burn it.
Delaney had been proffering the parchment, but at Sloane's statement she retracted her hand.
What? But it's my map. If we win this fight we won't need it anymore,
said Sloane.
Stop fucking around and give it.
Did Sloane even realize the amount of effort it took to find a detailed print map of a backwater hick town in rural North Dakota? How many archives, how many bureaucratic labyrinths had Delaney plundered to procure this one map, which had served them so well despite Winnipeg's rather rude defacement? And now Sloane wanted to burn it? And she was so testy, too. Delaney thought to voice her opinions when Sloane seized her wrist and wrenched the paper from her hand, ignoring her indignant shriek. Once the paper had been pried from her fingers, however, Delaney no longer felt so attached and let Sloane off with a minor harumph. With one extended hand holding the crumpled pieces of map and the other holding the glasses, Sloane positioned herself precariously on the bubbles, squinting her eyes and measuring the distance between the two seemingly random objects. She held the glasses to her face while she extended the map away from her, and then pulled it back close.
Excuse the intrusion, love, but what is it exactly you are doing? Ever fry ants?
Said Sloane.
Ants? You know, with a magnifying glass. I thought that was something rustic children did, but only in nostalgic movies.
Sloane shut one eye and bit her lip. A vague glow emanated from the hand holding the glasses.
In fact, I never did it either. Before Minneapolis I lived in Arizona. Lots of sun all the time. Sometimes I thought about going out and frying ants, but it was always too damn hot. Okay.
Said Delaney.
The point is, same logic here. You take a glass, focus light through it, and presto. Shit gets hot.
The aura engulfed her hand in light. Delaney shielded her face and cast a glance over her shoulder to check how Sloane's gun was holding up in the constant war of the roots. She applied a few bubbles to aid the defense. She didn't have the heart to tell Sloane her scheme lacked scientific feasibility. Ignoring the suboptimal use of non-prescription reading lenses as a substitute for the uniform regularity and superior convexity of a magnifying glass, the laws of entropy meant no matter the focusing power of her lens, Sloane could not create heat that exceeded the temperature of the heat source, i.e. the orb of light in her hand. And since the orb gave off little heat, by Sloane's own admission and Delaney's observation, this was an exercise in futility. At least she thought that until a small charred mark appeared on the tip of the map. Delaney lowered her hand and squinted. The mark spread, the map bending and decaying as if animated in stop motion, the red lines of Williston contorting and ultimately dissolving into nothingness, the town becoming effigy, an erasure in facsimile. But it made no scientific sense. Entropy. Delaney, you idiot. The powers of a magical girl were specifically harnessed to combat entropy. Their magic was emotion transformed into literal power. Sloane's belief in her ability meant more than the scientific processes guiding it, as she literally traded chunks of her soul for a desired outcome. Hence a magical girl's most vital attribute, creativity. And the capacity of their gem, of course. Delaney had no doubt this minor act of combusting a paper cost Sloane more than the machine gun had in the past 10 minutes. The second the map caught flame, Sloane shut off her light and tossed the glasses back to Delaney. She cupped a hand around the inchoate flicker, gently blowing and protecting it from the stagnant airless air that surrounded them. The fire grew, more of Williston was seared away.
Wow, love. Amazing.
Delaney clapped her hands with the wet thwack of oil. Sloane's eyes did not leave the flame. She bent close, almost singeing her nose, her lips pursed to feed it with oxygen from deep inside. Once the map had lit up like a torch, Sloane held out her arm and let it drop. Delaney, who was drenched in the stuff, basically caught fire instantly as an inferno detonated around them. Flames spread to Sloane's similarly drenched arm and she staggered back with a grunt of surprise. Before either of them became charbroiled, Delaney drenched them with a deluge of blood and enveloped them in a protective bubble. The bubble ascended into the air. Sloane staggered back, checking the damage. She had lost a good part of her sleeve, as Delaney coalesced the bloody runoff and added it to the shell of the bubble around them, leaving them spick and span, no oil, no blood. Their clothes had not fared well, of course. Apart from Sloane's sleeve, the hem of Delaney's gown had become a series of burnt strips that flittered around her legs. God damn it! It was always the worst when your clothes got ruined. It could be so difficult to mend magical apparel if you lacked the appropriate skills. Think fashion later, Delaney. The flames had spread across the surface of the lagoon, consuming the bounteous fuel. Pillars of smoke rose into the cavern, swirling among the roots like twisted tendrils of yet another creature. The Archon or something else loosed an arrhythmic squeal that seemed less pained than annoyed.
It worked, said Sloane. I know. Very good, love,
said Delaney. She inspected one of her long white gloves, which had been rendered basically worthless by the fire. Finger by finger she removed it. The other glove was okay, so despite the asymmetry she left it. No point in wastefulness. Something landed atop the bubble with a boing. It was Winnipeg, crouched low and on her knees. One sword held the drawn katana while the other smoothed down her skirt due to her compromising position directly above them. What's all this, she said. I set stuff on fire, said Sloane.
Oh, just get in here already.
Delaney waved her staff and made her bubble semi-permeable. Winnipeg's body sank through until the blood no longer supported her and she plopped between them with a healthy splat. She quickly rearranged herself, shame. Delaney loved seeing dear Winnipeg in undignified positions, and shuffled to Sloane's side of the bubble to stare onto the hellscape below.
The fire is having an effect already, said Winnipeg.
A true statement. The myriad roots had abandoned their previous interests and now roared through the air, some ablaze, attending to the main bulb, beating back the flames with invertebrate slaps against the oil field. A root very near their bubble wagged back and forth as fire enveloped it, filling the air with psychic shrieks until it went rigid and sunk into the flames. The bulb, said Sloane. She pointed. At first, Delaney could not see what Sloane indicated, but as the motions grew more pronounced it became clear the bulb was opening. By now almost the entire mammoth cavern of the Archon had filled with engorged smoke columns, but the Archon itself remained visible through sheer immensity. The bulb as one unified being shuddered and woke. The leathery black skin peeled away into 4 massive petals, vast triangular strips like pieces of circus tent. Although the bulb had been only unbroken blackness on the outside, its inner skin swarmed with a hodgepodge of bright and exuberant colors, reds, greens, blues, oranges, yellows. Sometimes polka dots, sometimes stripes, sometimes plaid. Sloane couldn't tell for sure but she thought the colors were changing as she looked, like the inside of the Archon had no distinct identity, rather a constantly shifting one. Delaney's bubble rose above the blooming petals, exacerbating the disorientation of the inner skin with the flickering flames and squirming roots beneath. The petals scraped against the walls of the den, their immense surface area blocking most of the smoke. At the center of the 4 petals was nothing but a round and dark depression into which nothing could be perceived. From this hole rose the stem of the flower that had before adorned the top of the Archon. Until the Archon had fully bloomed, the flower remained unchanged, small and unassuming in the enormity of the space around it. But once the 4 petals, or flaps of skin, or whatever Sloane didn't know jack dick about plant biology, and she doubted the Archon knew either, had settled, the flower changed. Not with any kind of transformation sequence or visible mutation. One moment it was the flower, and the next Sloane had to rub her eyes to make sure she was seeing things correctly, because all at once it had become something else. Delaney rolled onto her back and laughed hysterically. Sloane and Winnipeg glanced at her once and turned back to the Archon. The stalk of the flower had become a long, thick neck, adorned with technicolor feathers, swaying to and fro in a vaguely hypnotic dance. The head of the thing was unseeable behind a strange round mask that at first had a Pablo Picasso African tribal vibe, all empty black eyes and scarification, but like the colors of the petals seemed to change before Sloane's eyes, until she could no longer tell which was actually changing, the Archon or her sight. The features arranged into a semblance of structure and form, assembling themselves across the mask until they became Claire Ibsen? Her face, at least, in a pretty stunning likeness. Sloane was more impressed than anything. Unlike her prior hallucination, it was obvious the mask was mere mimicry. Just Claire Ibsen's stupid face open-mouthed like a grouper, her same bleach-white skin and platinum hair hanging in gangly strands. Sloane folded her arms.
Let's fucking kill this thing already. I assume it takes a different appearance for you than for me,
said Winnipeg.
Ditto for Delaney,
said Sloane. Delaney stifled her sniggering with a hiccup and climbed to her feet, wiping the corners of her eyes.
Oh my. Sorry, dears. But if you could see what I see on that thing's face. Whatever it is, it's a distraction, said Sloane. Ignore it and proceed as usual. Let's unleash some heavy-duty firepower into this thing, enough to see if it takes damage. Once we have an idea of its abilities, we can figure a better plan. Keep in communication.
Delaney hemmed and affected a more serious tone.
It blocks telepathy. If we move too far apart, we can't stay in contact. We'll deal as we go,
said Sloane.
Pop the bubble.
The bubble popped. The three girls dispersed like spores from a pod and descended on a rising coil of roots and thorns. Sloane concentrated on sticking a landing on a narrow sliver of root and managed to succeed with acrobatic aplomb, not even impaling her foot on a thorn or anything. She materialized her gun in her hands and dashed along the trajectory of the root. Winnipeg had landed on a nearly parallel route. Together they dashed at an almost 90-degree angle toward the masked head of the Archon, blasting and slicing at the infestation that sought to batter them back. A root swiped low at Sloane's legs, but she leapt with instinctual reflexes and sharpened perspective. Around her, blood bubbles deflected other attackers, although Sloane had no time to find Delaney among the bramble. Ahead stretched the Archon and her salvation. The petals of the Archon trembled and spewed a million tiny pollen particles into the air. In a nebulous otherworld, Delaney shouted not to breathe. But as the spores surrounded her and filled the entire cavernous den, how could she not breathe? With so much excitement, so much furor surging through her. She bit her lip and tried to close her lungs, tried to subsist on soul energy alone as she sprinted from root to root, leaping across the narrow and constantly shifting platforms to her ultimate goal. But the allergens clouded her eyes, her vision grew subdued despite the magical perspicacity of her sight. Ahead loomed the Archon. Its mask continued to adapt. Now the visage of Claire Ibsen seemed even more lifelike, even more real, although it still painted the ridiculous image of a human head atop a long furred throat emerging from a massive flower. The roots whipped furiously at her, but despite the spores she staved onward. Winnipeg and Delaney had fallen out of sight, only the Archon existed. The Archon with Claire Ibsen's face. She reached the end of one root and bounded into the air, heaving her gun in front of her and blasting the face with as good as she could give. The light tore through a few flaming roots and battered the face itself with a tinny twang before bouncing off in every direction. The face stared at her, unharmed, unblinking. She should have expected a normal attack to fail, and yet she had committed fully to it and now hung in the opiate air surrounded by twitching vines and toxic thorns. As her body reached the zenith of its leap and came crashing down to the petals below, why had she thrown herself so far forward for an attack she knew wouldn't work? Why? Winnipeg soared past frozen like a ballerina, one leg bent at the knee and the other straight, her arms splayed like wings and her katana shining. Behind her swirled a cyclone of fire, the winds of her magic funneling the pyre from the lagoon in a massive topsy-turvy column. A gust caught Sloane from behind and dragged her along, heat lapping at her skin. Winnipeg raised her katana and launched the cyclone at the Archon. It curved through the air like a gigantic drill and smashed into the mask. The Archon chattered and clicked as flame enveloped it, catching on the feathers of its throat. The mask disappeared beneath the flames and the neck spasmed with jerky, bird-like motions. For a moment it appeared as though Winnipeg's attack had dealt a critical blow. But with one tremendous shake the Archon cleared the flames, revealing the same Claire Ibsen mask face with the features altered to fury. Claire Ibsen unhinged her jaw with an electronic whir. From the void within spewed an array of dazzling crystal shards. Winnipeg threw up a hand to defend the soul gem strung from her neck and Sloane had a mere moment to do likewise as the shards crashed against them. What felt like about 50 jagged knives dug into Sloane's body. She gasped the breath she had shored to prevent inhaling the Archon's pollen as foreign bodies plunged deep through her skin and diced her innards to ribbons. One thick blade gored her through the cheek. She tasted iron blood on her tongue and something hard like bone knocked against her teeth until she yanked it out. It took her only a moment to identify the spade-shaped, blood-drenched object. Seeds. The Archon had implanted them with seeds. Still sailing on Winnipeg's current as it cycled them around the perimeter of the den, Sloane tore furiously at the seeds lodged in her chest and stomach, wrenching each out with a painful groan and hurling it away. She devoted part of her mind to her gun to keep the roots at bay, but it was tough to focus as she clawed more and more frantically at the seeds lodged inside her.
Oh dear!
Delaney rode by atop a small bubble.
That looks bad.
More incoming,
said Winnipeg. The Archon/Claribson bellowed again and spat another volley. A bubble ballooned to catch the spray, the seeds sticking in the bloody membrane.
Now let's take a look-see at these things.
Delaney drifted next to Sloane and bent forward to examine the seeds still stuck in her skin. Sloane wrenched another out with a wheeze. Before Delaney made much progress, a root whipped out of the bramble and ran her through the back. The bright red barb poked out her chest, spilling blood down the front of her gown. Delaney jammed her staff into the wound and tried to pry herself free. The root reeled her back, her legs hanging uselessly as she disappeared into the thick tangle. The bubble she had erected to protect them from the Archon seeds burst.
Shit,
said Sloane. She extricated another seed and looked for Winnipeg. She was nearby, alternating between removing seeds from herself and lopping roots.
We need to regroup.
The seeds still implanted in Winnipeg erupted in unison, sprouting wiry stems with knotted joints. Before Sloane could react, her own seeds burst and 10 or 20 stems coiled around her. They quickly bound her arms and enveloped her throat. The jagged joints dug into her skin and forced her to gasp for air, only to suck in a mouthful of spores. Her eyes bulged as her hands clenched into useless fists, her legs kicking as the wind dispersed and dropped her into the roots. She struggled for air, her lungs already wilting from having held her breath. The stems that sprouted from the seeds sliced into her jacket and then her skin like razor wire. The bizarre image flashed into her mind of her school field trip to a packing plant and the way the workers used metal wire to cut thick blocks of cheese, the wire dragging through the yellow flesh with morbid effortlessness. Sloane had refused to watch. As she fell, she twisted in midair. A root rose up, its red barb poised to impale. The wire around her throat dug deep and all movement became impossible. An invisible force pulled her out of the way. She sailed through the serpentine roots that lurched and struck at her, her body propelled beyond her control. A tiny voice whispered in her ear,
"Don't worry, I got you."
It was Omaha. "Get these things off me," said Sloane. Omaha dropped onto a petal of the Archon, still aglow with its multicolored panoply like a bright red strip of tarpaulin in an otherwise grey expanse. Sloane went invisible, causing the world to fade to a bleary and unclear vista. Omaha entered her view, wrapped in a long cowled cloak. "We have to be quick," said Omaha. She set Sloane onto the petal and materialized a long, curved scythe in her hand. She looked like a grim reaper. Even her gaunt pale face added to the aesthetic. The Archon can surely sense us even if it cannot see us. She swung the scythe with a deft motion and severed the roots around Sloane's body. Sloane rolled over and burst her arms free of the still clutching roots, gasping for breath and pulling seeds from her body. Thousands of small lacerations littered her skin. "I only have basic curative magic," said Omaha, as if reading Sloane's mind. "And it'll take too long to work. You'll have to bear it." Whatever, Sloane could handle pain. The circumstances of her soulless body dampened it. Given time, she would regenerate naturally, although not within the frame of this fight. Finding Delaney was paramount. And Winnipeg, shit. The Archon had scattered them with remarkable efficiency. "Omaha, we need to find the others. You go for Delaney, I'll get Winnipeg." Omaha flinched as a root roared overhead. She clutched her scythe tight and kept her hand like a vice on Sloane's wrist. "Why should I go for Delaney? You need her to heal you, you should find her." "That doesn't matter. Delaney is more important to find. You can move undetected, you have the better chance. Don't argue." "Okay." Omaha nodded. Her cowl bobbed over her head and covered her eyes. She reached into her folds and retrieved a pendant on a necklace. "You should take this, Sloane." Sloane seized the pendant and examined it. It was Winnipeg's soul gem. "I could only carry one of you, but I needed to make sure the other wouldn't die. So I swiped Miss de Fresney's gem to keep her safe." "Smart work," said Sloane. The roots gathered closer and the Claribson mask of the Archon seemed to look in their direction. Sloane wondered what Omaha saw in the mask, if the mask reflected something from inside each of them. "Let's move, Omaha." Omaha gave a surprisingly warm smile. Okay. Good luck, Sloane. She let go. Sloane plunged back into the visible world. Omaha melded into nothingness. The Claire mask gaped its mouth and screeched in fury at the pest that appeared atop its petal. Roots tipped with red barbs careened from every direction, but Sloane was ready to fight and ready to run. As the roots converged, she materialized another machine gun and jumped into the air like a corkscrew, spewing cleansing light in a 360-degree torrent. The roots in her immediate vicinity fell squirming into the fires below. The Archon spat another volley of seeds at her. Sloane threw the gun in front of her and bounced across it like a platform, calling it back to her side as she soared through the air and somersaulted onto the spine of another root, the seeds whizzing past and striking nothing but air. She winced away the pain from her wounds and ignored the blood drizzling down her jacket as she sprinted down the route and peeled her eyes for Winnipeg. She tried to sharpen her eyesight, but the spores in her irises nullified her efforts. She wondered about the pollen she had sucked into her lungs and hoped no wonky mindfucks would screw her over. The whole world around her seemed an incomprehensible cluster of nonsense, from the roots to the smoke to the monolithic proportions to the gaudy colors to Claire Ibsen's face attached to an avian neck, but she was pretty sure that was all stuff that was actually happening. At least, she hoped so. Winnipeg. Delaney. Were you it? No luck. She looped the same words over in her mind in case she blundered into communication range, but if either girl was in a state to respond, it would be miraculous. At least with Winnipeg's soul gem in her pocket, she could be certain one of them wasn't dead. Wait. If Sloane had Winnipeg's gem, that meant Winnipeg was unconscious, technically dead, and had no way of hearing her. God damn it. She danced from root to root. When she felt cheeky, she levied gunfire at the Claire mask. No effect, even when she assaulted the feathery neck instead of the face. But each hit registered a solid, corporeal sound, unlike the earlier attacks against the bulb, which had been absorbed altogether. A concentrated attack from both her and Winnipeg might be able to. There. Deep in the bramble, between columns of smoke and backdropped by flickering fire. An unmistakable flash of lavender that could have only originated from Winnipeg's uniform. Without hesitation, Sloane plunged into the depths. She skated down the roots in search of the small purple scrap her hazy half-blurred vision had espied, only doubting if she had seen anything at all once halfway down, and the fire on the lagoon raged like the pits of hell rising to grasp her. She waved her machine gun, whipping rays of erasure through roots and splattering white pus in every direction. Everywhere was some loony profusion of surreal imagery. She shoved a hand to her eyes and blasted herself with a beam of light, repairing the damage immediately with her magic. The trick worked for a few seconds, giving her a clearer perspective on her surroundings, but soon more spores dulled her visual senses. Her fucking kryptonite, she needed her eyes. They were the best thing about her, and this stupid fucking Archon somehow knew exactly what to counter, since the spores seemed to have no additional effects whatsoever. Or was this another psychological thing? Was the blurred vision in her mind? Did the other girls suffer different afflictions, each tailored to their perceived strengths? Nobody else had complained they couldn't see. The flash of lavender scrolled across the periphery of her vision. She turned as something disappeared between two coiled roots. Had it been Winnipeg, or the Archon fucking with her? Luring her deeper. Fuck that shit. She would solve her problems exactly the way she knew best, blasting them to bits. She dove in the direction Winnipeg had fallen and obliterated the roots in front of her with her gun. As the way cleared, she saw with clarity now the small limp body of Winnipeg, stuck to a larger root by a thick thorn that had rammed through her back. Her mouth hung agape in immutable surprise and her eyes swam with a dim deadness. Sloane landed beside her and yanked her arms to pull her from the roots. With a dose of magic to make the girl near weightless, she hoisted Winnipeg onto her back koala-like. Winnipeg's head nestled against the crook of Sloane's neck and her arms hung down Sloane's front, the pencil-thin wrists bound by one of Sloane's hands. The machine gun clenched in the other. Sloane assessed her position. She had landed deep into the seething nest of roots. Thorns thronged around her, poised to prick with debilitating toxin. The way she had come, from above, had closed completely. No light filtered in and the world had grown dark around her.
For Sloane, light is kinda my thing.
Redfern, there could be no more inconsequential setback. She illuminated the area by blasting her gun into the roots below. A spire drilled deep in a perfect corkscrew. She followed the passage she cut.
Wake up, Winnipeg!
Since up had ceased to be an option, she would eventually drop into the fires below. She needed Winnipeg's wind magic by then, but the tiny girl had been totally knocked out. As Sloane prodded her, she realized Winnipeg was still wearing her lavender ensemble even though her magic was inactive. No, not exactly the same as her magical girl outfit. A close enough replica to deceive at first glance. Winnipeg had literally reconstructed her uniform for civilian wear. Was that dedication or insanity? She obliterated a root and hellfire roared up to greet her. Already in free fall, Sloane angled for a low-hanging loop of thorny root and barely managed to hit it, her balance precarious.
Wakey wakey Winnipeg, rise and shine.
She jostled Winnipeg's head with her own as she warded away pursuing roots with her gun. Winnipeg groaned, stirred. Her body trembled against Sloane's back. A foot struck spasmodically and jabbed Sloane in the thigh. She sputtered a little, coughed. Blood formed on her lower lip in a squash-colored bubble and burst, dribbling down her chin. More and more roots emerged.
Get your shit together quick, sunshine, we gotta bounce. But,
said Winnipeg. One eyelid flickered open and drooped lazily. Sloane swept her gun across the foes.
There we go, come on now. But, box.
Sloane persisted with gentle pleading and affected her most maternal tone, which was not very maternal. A barb lashed out and she scrambled aside to evade it, nearly toppling headlong off her constantly shifting platform.
Box. Open the box. There's no goddamn box,
said Sloane. Was this just woke up with a concussion speak or a delusion from the past incited by the thorn's poison? Sloane knew nothing about Winnipeg's past, had only the barest conception of how a box might factor into it. The only thing she could think was that one movie with Brad Pitt's wife's severed head in a box, but why she wasted precious cognitive capacity thinking about that right now, who fucking knew?
What's in the box?
The root on which Sloane stood had become too unstable. She bounded onto another, which afforded even less leg space than the previous.
Nothing's in the goddamn box,
she said. Winnipeg's hand seized Sloane's shoulder.
There's gotta be something in there.
A strange terror quavered in her voice. The delusions had worked their way out of Sloane's system naturally after a short time. It must be a byproduct of their regenerative bodies or magical energy or whatever. Delaney probably had a better grasp on the theoretical aspects.
Why,
said Sloane.
Why something gotta be there?
She fried another root.
It's the reason,
Winnipeg mumbled.
It's the reason in the box. The purpose. That makes no sense.
Confront her on her bullshit, force her to realize the absurdity. Wake her from dreamland. It worked like that in the movies.
If there's nothing, I need to know. The box. Open it. There is no box.
She scanned the area. No more convenient routes. The nearest docile one was way in the distance, and the hostile ones sought a lapse in her concentration, an opening to exploit. The fires raged below and their smoke made searching for the closest enemies difficult.
Has to be in the box. The reason for why I'm... Winnipeg, don't wax philosophical on me, I need you to do things. The reason is we die if you don't.
From a thick plume of smog a hitherto unseen root lashed out. Sloane barely had time to register the attack and raise her gun to deflect the blow. The stinger crashed through the gears and machinery, destroying the well-oiled parts. The impact sent Sloane staggering into open air. She fell.
Winnipeg.
A blast of wind surged in a vicious tornado. The fires were blasted away by the onslaught, caught in the whirl like thin threads of orange silk, lighting the gathered roots like fuses as fast-acting flame raced into the cluster above. Gravity ceased its pull and Sloane found herself suspended, no longer gripping Winnipeg but Winnipeg gripping her. The young girl's eyes reflected the flames caught in the whirlwind.
What did I babble, she said.
Nothing worth worrying about, said Sloane. Her legs dangled in the current.
Let's hit that fucking thing with everything we got.
Winnipeg nodded, her mouth still speckled with blood and a ghastly pallor denuding her carbuncular skin but the familiar determination not lost among it. The wind screeched a death whistle as it heaved them through the air, their bodies cast uncontrollable toward the outer edges of the cavern. Winnipeg relinquished Sloane and seized her katana in both hands, channeling her energy as the massive force propelled them around the circumference of the lair. The fires curled and twisted like sunspots on the surface of a star galaxies away as Sloane and Winnipeg soared centrifugal, gaining momentum, gaining velocity. The Gordian knot of roots churned and watched.
Is this your finisher?
Sloane shouted. The wind swallowed her voice. Is this your finisher? Pa, said Winnipeg. This magic is not even offensive. My finisher will be the last thing you see in this fight, rest assured. We must remove that thing's mask and reveal its true form before I use it. Now hold on. Sloane swam through the bustling air and wrapped her arms around Winnipeg's waist. Her thick coattails buffeted her legs. By the way, Sloane said, I got something for you. She held out the necklace with Winnipeg's soul gem. The purple stone was mired but not incorrigible. Winnipeg nodded and allowed Sloane to slide the necklace over her head, where it reclaimed its rightful position. Now we ascend, said Winnipeg. The wind shifted and launched them skyward. The roots twisted to meet them, 1,000 barbs bared to impale. In an imperceptibly quick slash, the roots fell apart and Sloane and Winnipeg passed through a clean and blustery channel, a perfectly tubular passageway carved by Winnipeg's magic. The bramble corrected for its newfound cavity, but by the time its immense multifaceted body even began to move they had burst back above the Archon. The Archon turned its feathery neck and faced them with its mask. At first the Claire Ibsen face seemed to have lost most of its realism, but as it eyed them its features resumed a lifelike quality, brow furrowed and mouth twisted into a sneer. No sign of Omaha or Delaney. But this was as good a chance as any to dent the thing's armor. We hit it the best we got at the same time, said Sloane. We break the mask and then hope your finisher lives to its name. It will, said Winnipeg. Are you prepared? Sloane relinquished Winnipeg and flipped into the air. Another gun materialized in her hands. Let's fuck this bitch up. She squeezed the trigger but held her magic to charge the attack. The barrel of her gun span, churned, whirred, and grew translucent with the accumulated light within. Pain welled inside her as she drained thick chunks of her soul to build the attack stronger and stronger. Her arms and legs quivered uncontrollably, blood spurted from her numerous open wounds. Claire Ibsen's face leered at her as it expanded its mouth into an apocalyptic void. The moment it spat another hefty volley of seeds, Sloane released her magic. The gun roared with a grenade blast of light, a final spark that surged through the dead air and incinerated the seeds en route. At the same time, Winnipeg rushed forward, traveling close behind the all-illuminating orb of pure power. For a brief moment of suspended silence the Archon Claire Ibsen watched with dull apprehension, perhaps even fear, a sight that swelled Sloane with vindication as she rolled back from the recoil. The orb struck the Archon. At the moment of impact the orb collapsed and all light was sucked out of the cavern. The whole cylindrical structure plunged into the non-existence of absolute darkness. 1 second passed, 2 seconds passed. Then the light flared into tumultuous eruption of sight and sound. A horrific roar accompanied the spreading particles as the Archon lurched back with a vast bristling of its feathered throat. A billion tiny rivets spread across the Claire Ibsen mask like the croquelure of mummification. In the next moment, Winnipeg, who had been behind the orb all along, whipped her arm horizontal across the mask. Claire Ibsen split in two, her mouth cut with a Glasgow smile. The two halves spread in opposite directions, afloat with ponderous sluggishness, as if physics itself had been staggered by the attack. Claire Ibsen shattered. A screaming blast sent Winnipeg hurtling backward. Both she and Fargo danced like rag dolls through the air, arms and limbs turned to jointless slabs of meat. Fargo struck the wall first, followed by Winnipeg. Winnipeg groped for Fargo, caught an ankle, anchored herself to the larger girl. They hurtled in free-form plunge until Winnipeg collected her magic and caught them with an auspicious wind before they disappeared into the briar patch. They righted themselves in midair and let go one another. Winnipeg brushed back her hair and faced her enemy, now bereft of the face of Stuart Wibbo. No doubt Fargo had seen the visage of Minneapolis, but Winnipeg wondered what form it had taken for Regina Saskatoon. Bit by bit they had peeled away the Archon's distractions. Now they knew its true face. The Archon, the real Archon, had a long, serpentine head, bedecked with a pileated crest of so many vibrant shades of grey it seemed as though there had once been color, sapped away by an unknown eutrophication. A long, curved beak fashioned of pure ivory jutted from its face like an elephant tusk. Scrimshaw arabesques adorned the beak, harsh swirls and ingrained carvings of no immediate meaning. Above two tufts of feathers, where the Archon's eyes should be, familiar electric static fizzed and crackled. No more deceptions. This was its true face. It had to be its true face. Winnipeg did not have the stamina or the soul to continue fighting if this was not its true face. With a deep puncture wound in her back and numerous lacerations across her skin, a stoic ceiling of pain became less and less feasible if she wanted energy to spare for combat. She had rationed power for her finisher, it needed to work now. She raised her katana overhead. Fargo sputtered something, but Winnipeg ignored her as she focused her power into the sword. Her finisher had a 5-second charge time. In magical combat 5 seconds was virtual eternity, and the wind-up served as her otherwise infallible finisher sole downside. Even Fargo's attack that had fractured the Archon's mask had taken only half the time. But if Winnipeg could pull it off...
Barask!
The Archon opened its beak and loosed a nerve-shattering song. The sound waves traveled as a visible pulse through the den and knocked Winnipeg and Fargo back against the wall. Great chunks of earth broke from the ceiling and descended in rapid cascades. Fargo grabbed Winnipeg and dove away from a falling boulder. The energy around Winnipeg's katana dissipated and the attack went unfinished. They rebounded and lost control in the air. Winnipeg exerted her will on her wind magic to fight against their schizoid trajectory, but the petals swirled beneath, vivid oranges and greens, so freakishly colorful in an otherwise colorless realm that it stirred faint feelings of nausea. The walls of the den continued to rumble and quake as the petals curled upward. No, not curling upward. Spreading. The petals were becoming the walls around them. The vibrant pigmentation bled from the petals onto the ashen surfaces and swallowed the world in obnoxious polka dot wallpaper. The transformation happened with torpid slowness and yet seemed to happen all at once. The walls and fires stripped away until all sense of direction disappeared and they entered a nebulous dimension of tropical clown colors. The only distinguishable object in the entire semi-permanent haze was the Archon itself, the vast floating column of feathered neck that extended from a wrinkle in the world rather than something plant-like and organic. From similar wrinkles sprouted the Archon's countless roots. A vast array of perforations dotted the vacuous landscape. There were even more roots now, the endless coil clotting and blocking view of the Archon proper, although not the painful expressionist garbage that surrounded them. Or perhaps the world itself had grown smaller and the Archon, in changing the colors of the wall, had altered them in a way Regina Saskatoon said was within its power.
Ooh, what an interesting development,
said Regina Saskatoon herself as she melded out of the background and encased the three of them in a protective bubble.
It must be truly desperate. It's trying to alter the miasma despite our counteractive presence. A dire gambit indeed.
It's working, said Winnipeg. No trace remained of the previous den, all was now color.
Where did you come from?
Said Fargo to Regina Saskatoon. This bubble was much smaller than the last. They nearly pressed together in the tight confines. Regina Saskatoon donned a wan smile. She did not look good. In addition to the numerous half-healed wounds that coated her body, her uniform had gone to tatters and her hair, normally quite brown, had developed several strands of grey. Dark bags underlined her eyes. And yet the soul gem on her shoulder remained flawless.
Funny story, that, she said. I remember being dragged by a root, having all sorts of delusions, and then presto! I was free, something had severed the root. I regained my senses just in time to observe your attack on the Archon's mask. Bravo, by the way, truly stunning teamwork and coordination.
Roots pounded against the bubble. It bulged with wet squishes. Blood drizzled from the weakening walls onto their heads.
No time for idle prattle, said Winnipeg.
Regina Saskatoon seemed like she might literally break into pieces at any moment.
Winnipeg's right.
Fargo's tall, lanky body contorted to fit inside the bubble. Her neck craned at an awkward angle.
If the Archon can fuck up space-time, we're dicked. We have exposed its true face. Now is time to behead this snake.
Winnipeg jabbed a finger against Regina Saskatoon's chest to get her attention and she lolled her head toward Winnipeg in response.
I need you to shield me long enough I can charge my finisher. Your finisher can cut through all these roots and the Archon,
said Fargo. Winnipeg's first impulse was to give a resounding and unwavering yes. That single affirmative word, with no explanation or qualification, the absolute confidence and understanding of one's ability that defined everything admirable and impressive to human beings. The kind of response she would have given 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts because it was so easy to simulate confidence simply by acting without thinking. As though all she had to do was say something fast enough and it meant she knew what she was doing.
I cannot be certain.
She closed her eyes and exhaled. The Archon was no longer visible behind the thick knot of roots. A root struck the bubble and sheared it open. In a wash of blood they toppled into formless subspace, beset on all sides by roots. Regina Saskatoon laughed and swung her staff wildly at nothing. Winnipeg, said Fargo as she forced the roots back with the blare of her gun. Use your finisher to take out the roots. I can kill the Archon. When I use my finisher I'm out of the fight, said Winnipeg. I will be unable to do anything until I have cubes. Fargo grabbed Winnipeg's arm. Trust me. If there's one thing I'm good at, it's blowing shit up. A whole host of thoughts crowded into Winnipeg's mind at once, each processed in the span of a millisecond. Calculations, projections, assumptions, assessments. Damage outputs versus defensive ramifications, potential unknowns and known unknowns. And somehow a lingering distaste at the thought of anyone but her performing the coup de grace upon the Archon, a disgust at her own relegation to a support role that her rational side quickly squashed. Fargo excelled at unloading high offensive damage onto immobile and undefended enemies, either single target or against mobbish clumps. And Winnipeg excelled at, what had Regina Saskatoon called it, AoE attacks, slaughtering numerous enemies at once either through her wind magic or her finisher, on top of her strong single target offense. Both could deal the damage necessary to kill the Archon, but of the two only Winnipeg could clear a path to it in the first place. The strategy was inarguable. She would stand aside and give Fargo the opportunity to end. She wheeled on Regina Saskatoon and slapped her in the face.
Wake up and quit giggling, you condemnable minx. I need a barrier around me for 5 seconds, do you think you can manage even that?
The roots closed in tight. Regina Saskatoon attempted a serious face and saluted.
All right. Here goes.
The world around Winnipeg became red, muting the motley outside. On the other side of the barrier, Regina Saskatoon held aloft her staff, the arm visibly palpitating. A root lashed out and gored Regina Saskatoon through the back. Winnipeg stopped wasting time and raised her katana to channel the energy for her finisher. Fargo slammed against the outside of the bubble, propping her back against it as she warded off encroaching roots. As Regina Saskatoon was dragged away, she extended her other hand and surrounded Fargo in a similar barrier. The katana gleamed a fluorescent neon as energies buzzed around the tip. The power coursed through Winnipeg's veins as she poured her everything into the attack. Fargo stripped away, Regina Saskatoon stripped away, the roots and the petals and the world stripped away until everything became a white-hot blear in her mind.
Barask.
The roots perhaps sensed her power and battered the barrier to strike at her, to disrupt her concentration, and perhaps that accounted for the dull rhythmic thump in the back of her skull. But they could not stop her. As the final word formed, nothing could stop her.
Denouement.
The barrier burst and she unleashed her finisher. Winnipeg burst into 100 whispery copies of herself, each composed of wind but taking her form, with sinew, muscle, structure, pulse. A squall of ferocious gale shredded through the roots as the 100 Winnipeg clones fanned out in a circular pattern, each dragging her katana through plant matter and virulent ooze. Each Winnipeg sliced, shredded, cut with her same finesse and technique, her same skill and prowess, each imbued with a dollop of her soul and the howl of Zephyr. Roots peeled back and dropped in every direction as the blades whipped through them. They spouted viscous white pus into the lurid landscape and squealed as they thrashed and gnashed their worthless thorny limbs and dropped into orange oblivion below. Winnipeg and her facsimiles of self spread between them toward the ends of the arena, each leaving a swath of destruction in her wake until they butted against an unseen wall and bounced back in dissipating puffs of smoke and wind. As fast as the attack had taken to charge, it ended. The clones ran out the end of their microcosmic souls, extinguished the little life with which Winnipeg had nourished them. Their sparks fizzled one by one until the wind died completely and the real Winnipeg drifted backward among the gaudy backdrop. All energy had left her. The muscles in her fingers could not even muster the strength to retain her katana, and the blade drifted from her hand as she fell. She had no breath left, her eyes threatened to close completely. She could not even feel her own heartbeat, even as all sound and sense folded in on itself and left only herself to feel. The debris and dead roots, some still twitching, drifted alongside her. Like the wreckage of some phantasmic god in an alternate reality. No, not like, it was. Not a single root had been spared. Only the Archon itself remained, a monolithic obelisk of pinions and avian elements that presided over the wasted land. A small blip on the other side of the world sped toward the Archon, Fargo. Her jacket billowed behind her as she soared through the asteroid belt of pruned roots, the barrel of her gun awhirl and burning with light energy. Winnipeg tried to move her arm, failed. Her body sailed as if in zero gravity, although she harbored the distinct impression of downward descent. It was all up to Fargo now. Winnipeg bumped into something, changed direction. She revolved in midair, unable to see the Archon or Fargo anymore, unable to control her flight. Her turn was slow and lateral. She saw what she had bumped into, Regina Saskatoon, a bloodied mess interspersed with flecks of white, either skin or bone. Her eyes were empty, her mouth slightly open. One arm missing entirely. The gem fastened to the brooch on her shoulder had shattered. Winnipeg's uncontrolled revolution continued until again she faced the Archon and Fargo. The timing was impeccable, as at that moment Fargo unleashed her attack. Winnipeg had turned too late to see if Fargo had charged her gun again or if she had used some other technique. Fargo did not strike her as the kind of Puella Magi who employed very many techniques. Her one technique was usually effective enough. The Archon reared back as gallon after gallon of pure light bombarded it. The light flared out and repainted the walls, drowning the orange and green and other violent colors with all-purifying white. The fabric of the bizarro dimension began to shatter before the Archon did, or not so much shatter as fade, through the walls osmosed images of earth and rock, of a real world somewhere that may on some plane of existence overlap with theirs. The Archon itself lit up along its thin tubular body with the effulgent cannonballs force-fed it by Fargo as her gun whirred with unstoppable force. Its tricks stripped away, its roots, its limbs, its everything, the Archon was not so strong. Winnipeg clenched her fist, felt blood vessels return to her veins. She perhaps could still stand to fight herself. But allow Fargo that glory. She revolved again. Regina Saskatoon had retreated to a small motionless dot in the distance. Winnipeg did not see the Archon finally die, did not see what spectacular explosion or implosion or conflagration destroyed its body. She did not see much of anything as the light from Fargo's gun swallowed the world, until not a strip of orange or green remained. She did, however, hear the beast roar with a final, tragic scream, a scream that seemed to carry a physical corporeality in its absolute sorrow and despair, a scream surprisingly knowing, devoid of animalism, a scream that seemed to lament the end of life rather than a primal instinct of survival. Then the scream ended. And the light ended. And Winnipeg hit the ground in a small dark cave. The dregs of the miasma wafted away with the last reverberations of the scream. Winnipeg rolled onto her back, but everything had gone dark. She flung out an arm and felt gravel through her fingers. Real gravel. Real earth. The roof collapsed and buried her in dirt. Chapter 12, I hope you die in a fiery death. Real light leaked from the narrow aperture in the ceiling. Even in a depleted haze Sloane recognized it as the rays of early morning. Early morning. They had entered Williston the night prior. Everything they had done in the span of a single night. Unreal, the images and events that replayed in her mind as she untangled the discombobulated strands of neural matter inside her skull. The Archon was dead. The miasma shattered. With a heave of exertion Sloane sat up. A thick layer of dust cascaded off her body. Her every bone and joint ached with soreness. A dull pang, like the throb of a soul gem gone tilt, slushed in her blood. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light of the underground crevice in which she sat, she fished her pockets for her gem. The yellow luster swirled with rust and tarnish. She needed cubes. Good thing the entire cave twinkled with them. Small black squares caught the dull daylight and refracted infinite diamond sparkles. She sifted her hand through the dirt and came up with 4 or 5. After a few seconds of purification, her thoughts cleared and she remembered her companions. She lurched to her feet and powered through dizziness as she scanned for Winnipeg and Delaney. "Hey," she said. The words scraped her esophagus. She swallowed hard and spoke again. "Where are you?" Something in the darker reaches groaned. Sloane staggered toward it. Her boots and pockets swished with sand. She considered shedding her jacket, but a wintry chill pervaded the cave and she felt exposed without it. Amid the cubes she found a body and fell to her knees before it. She turned it over and immediately reeled back at the mangled visage and putrid stench. Was this? No, it was the mystery corpse from beneath the Archon. So it had not been a deception, but a real girl. Sloane's head pulsed too much to think more. The something groaned again, closer. Sloane crawled past the corpse and called out. Her voice cracked. Her lungs rattled with dirt as she crawled toward another half-buried form. She had to get very close and squint and brush off soot before she identified it as Winnipeg. As Sloane excavated, Winnipeg twisted and coughed. The gem strung from her neck had grown an almost black shade, but cubes already surrounded it, either placed already or strewn by chance. Thin streams of grief crept into them. "You okay?" Sloane shoveled handfuls of fine powder from Winnipeg's body. Winnipeg suddenly lurched up, shook herself, and extricated her legs from the mound, causing a miniature avalanche. She shook herself like a dog, and although she swayed a little she remained upright. She rubbed her eyes, blinked, coughed again.
So it's over, she said.
Her sheathed katana clattered at her side. Was she still using magic? She had a replica of her uniform as civilian clothes, but also having a mock katana seemed ridiculous.
You should turn off, said Sloane.
Winnipeg shook herself again. For a moment they stood in the dark, saying nothing. Cubes twinkled, nothing else moved. Then the realization truly dawned on Sloane. They did it. They did it.
We did it,
she said. Winnipeg looked at her. Her face was wraith-like in the darkness. She stared with stolid emotionlessness, and then, bit by bit, her features softened and a wide smile broke over her face.
We did,
she said.
We did.
Sloane had no idea what else to say, what else to convey the elation welling up inside her, the pure unadulterated joy that blossomed in her soulless body like the Grinch stole Christmas, so she swung her arms around Winnipeg and squeezed her tight. Winnipeg's arms went taut at her sides and her entire body tensed. Sloane had no idea whether a hug was the right thing considering Winnipeg's character, but fuck it, what she felt like was hugging something. Even if Winnipeg lashed out or broke away or said something mean, who gave a shit? They did it, they won, they killed the Archon, the ordeal was over, they had finally fucking worked together and accomplished something, and oh my fucking god did they really do it. After a moment, Winnipeg pressed her dirty forehead against Sloane's shoulder. Her trembling hands reached up and dug into Sloane's back.
Yes, she said. We did.
Winnipeg, said Sloane.
Holy shit, you were great. Your finisher.
She tried to convey in words what she had seen, Winnipeg's massive final attack, the wind clones, the roots, but the words caught in her throat, too many thoughts surged in her head, she could think of nothing.
Erika,
Winnipeg whispered.
What? I think.
Her voice was so tiny.
I think you can call me Erika.
Her wide eyes stared into an empty beyond. Sloane released Winnipeg. Erika, aware she had been permitted something no one had been permitted in a long time. Erika herself seemed shocked. She scratched at the stiff tall neck of her lavender vest, now grey with dirt. She shuffled her feet.
Then, call me Sloane,
said Sloane. Aware this option had been on the table all along and it had been Winnipeg's prerogative to take it, not Sloane's permission. But Erika nodded with a sincere bob of her head. They stood in silence for a long pause.
Okay,
said Sloane. She straightened her back and scanned the cave.
Let's find Delaney.
Erika scratched her neck again.
She's dead.
Dead? Sloane blinked.
No, she'll heal herself. She must be buried.
She fell by the mound, shoved her hands under the dirt, and scooped away handfuls.
I saw her,
said Winnipeg.
Her gem. Shattered.
Her old confidence and brashness crept back into her voice.
I saw it before you killed the Archon.
Sloane tore into the earth. She considered asking how certain Winnipeg was. But it was obvious Winnipeg was certain. Still Sloane dug. The ground was soft, easy to sift. She would at least find the body. She owed that much. Funny, though. The knowledge of Delaney's death did not impact her so heavily. A word blipped through her mind, acceptable. The word soured her mood more than the death did. She had not particularly liked Delaney, had not trusted her, had disagreed with her batshit philosophy and pseudo-religion, but she was still an ally and had stuck with her to the end. She deserved better than Sloane's callousness, although Sloane had never imagined herself one to sob at a funeral, and she had seen plenty of suburban girls pass in Minneapolis with barely a registration of their death in her mind, girls whose names now eluded her. But Sloane's ambivalence toward Delaney bent before the overwhelming joy of victory. Delaney's death seemed morally right in a sense, but Sloane did not want to think about it like that, and felt like an asshole for thinking about it in that way anyway. Her hand struck something. She wrapped her fingers around it and identified it as an arm. She pulled hard and the arm came out surprisingly easily, probably because it was not attached to anything. She ogled the severed limb like an artifact from a prehistoric dig.
I guess she is dead. It is probably for the best,
said Winnipeg.
Both for herself and her future acquaintances.
Sloane said nothing. After some thought Winnipeg added,
she was a sick woman, but she may have been human nonetheless. Such is all our state.
Sloane could think of no better eulogy. They stood in silence for another moment, as if the world were now composed of mere moments, each tick of the clock an event. Until Sloane said, "Let's clean our gems and find a way out of here." Erika nodded. Sloane crouched to the ground amid a field of cubes. More than enough for purification, as Kyubey had promised so long ago. Well, the rat bastard didn't lie. No need to waste time. She scooped a handful and enjoyed the tactile sensation they provided. On the upturned palm of her other hand she perched her soul gem and moved both hands close together, cubes and gem side by side. The grief began to leave her, its ribbony little streams so playful and carefree. Like visible music, sheets of trebles and time bursting into animation. She folded her legs beneath her and contented herself to merely watch the process unfold. Then her gem disappeared. She blinked. She turned over her hand. It had been there, right before her eyes, and now it was gone. She stood up and turned to Winnipeg.
Did
something sharp and curved slashed both of Sloane's hamstrings in one fluid motion. Her legs buckled and she plummeted face first with a strangled yelp. Winnipeg drew her katana only for something to cleave off her arm above the elbow. With unperturbed reflexes, her left arm lashed out and snatched the blade from her severed right arm as it descended. She swung in a spinning attack that blustered with a windy pulse. Dust and cubes billowed into the air. For a brief moment, Sloane made out a girl-shaped outline in the plume of dust. Then the cloud cleared and all went invisible again. Sloane tried to thrash her legs but they refused to cooperate. Without her soul gem she could not transform. Her hands clawed into the dirt to pull her forward but they only slipped through sand, unable to find an anchor.
"What is this sorcery?"
Winnipeg was remarkably calm despite the sudden apparition in her missing arm.
"Another magical girl, she can turn invisible, she's been watching us the whole time."
Winnipeg kicked up another plume of dust and danced across the cave in a flurry on one-handed strokes. If she swung at random or if she had somehow detected Omaha's presence in the small dusty bloom, Sloane could not tell. Winnipeg pivoted at random times and struck as though she knew the location of her opponent but the blade hit nothing. What was Omaha's weapon anyway? Sloane had seen it for a brief moment during the Archon fight. A sickle, or something. Scythe. The thing that cuts wheat?
"She's got a scythe."
Sloane hoped that helped. Maybe it did. Winnipeg varied her style, crouching lower to the ground. She kicked up dirt with quick flicks of her feet, an adaptive strategy except Omaha had adapted as well because no more did the dirt draw faint outlines in the darkness. Winnipeg breathed with labored gulps of air. Her magic could whip a tornado through the cave, and then Omaha would have difficulty keeping hidden. But Omaha had waited until their magic was all but extinguished. Winnipeg brushed back a clump tuft of hair and charged again with a wheezing yell. Her sword attacked in such erratic blows that they could not possibly be predicted, and yet still she hit nothing.
"Omaha, stop,"
said Sloane. Her useless legs churned in the dirt.
"Whatever Kyubey told you, you don't have to do this."
"Ha!" Winnipeg spat a globule of blood and swung again.
"This is a trained killer."
God damn it, Sloane had seen this coming, she had predicted it perfectly in the shower while Delaney gave her confession. And what had she decided? If they could take an Archon, they could take one girl? You stupid fucking idiot Sloane, you absolute most idiotic idiot to ever be a fucking idiot ever.
"There's no reason for this, Omaha."
Her voice sounded worthless, castaway. Pathetic. Winnipeg backed into a corner and slashed again. Her forehead glistened with sweat. The gem around her neck pulsed with a dangerous blackness.
"She's trying to tire you,"
said Sloane.
"Do you think I don't know that, you fucking idiot?"
shouted Winnipeg. Bloody spittle flew from her lips. Her eyes became something deranged.
We need to keep calm,"
said Sloane. Pointlessly. Pointlessly, and she knew it before she said it.
"Arg! Ah! Arg!"
screeched Winnipeg. She whipped her blade ahead of her and launched a forceful blast of wind through the cave. Sloane shielded her eyes from the surge of dust. As the dust subsided, Winnipeg raised her blade overhead. Wispy energies, black and weak, gathered around it. Her eyes blazed with fury. Blood streamed from the stump of her arm, blood streamed from her mouth.
"You don't have the energy,"
said Sloane. Reverting to nothingness, reverting to a stain on the underbelly of an empty prairie. unable to stand, unable to do a thing but watch as her friend. I will not lose, said Erica. Her voice teemed with desperation. I will not lose.
Borask. Denouement.
The invocation of her finisher unleashed the meager magic gathered around her blade. As before, Erica split into a multitude of Winnipegs, each composed and armed with wind. Far fewer formed now, but enough to fill the tight confines of the cave. The Winnipegs hacked and slashed in pantomime of the frenzied breathlessness, the real Winnipeg, the real Erica, each bashing their brains against the wall until they disappeared with nary a fizzle. Their decayed, zombie-like forms crossed every available inch of ground with vicious strokes. A blade raked across Sloane's back and she curled beneath the onslaught. Dirt rained upon her. The attack waned, howled, and ended. The wind went dead, a thick stagnation took its place. The real Erica, the sole remaining Erica, dropped to her knees. Her necklace was black as obsidian. She planted her katana in the ground beside her.
Got her,
she spat.
Got the bitch dead.
Her left eye twitched and her blood-stained lips curled into a smile.
Erica,
said Sloane. She tried to pull herself on her elbows toward the kneeling form. No matter how hard she tried, she made no progress. It was like a nightmare, a terrible nightmare, forced to watch helpless on an unseen conveyor belt. Could she be dreaming?
Cubes, get the cubes.
Cubes surrounded Erica, beckoned with their glimmers. Erica regarded them, spat a hoarse chuckle, and unbelievably extended a hand. Yes, yes, a little further. Sloane tried to shout but a mouthful of dirt constricted her throat. Winnipeg scooped a handful. Her laugh deepened. Clinging to a jutting rock embedded high in the wall, Omaha reappeared. The ragged girl unlatched from her perch and landed before Winnipeg, her scythe clutched in her hands. She did not swing or attack or speak or do anything except stand and stare with an expression blank and pitiless. Winnipeg's eyes turned from the cubes to the girl before her.
Cubes, cubes,
said Sloane. As though by transforming the word into chant she could imbue it with the magic she did not possess and make it do more than words did. Erica's smile died. Her eyes went as blank as Omaha's. The cubes fell from her tiny hand and her hand fell to her side.
Erica,
said Sloane.
Oh,
said Erica. Omaha stepped aside as Erica fell face down in the dirt. Without ceremony or aplomb, as was typical for those taken by the law of the cycles, Erica disappeared entirely.
Erica,
said Sloane. But Erica was no longer there, nor her katana, nor any trace of her existence save splotches of drying blood already seeping into the soil. Sloane's hands curled as if to grab the absence. Omaha observed the nothingness for a moment more before she turned toward Sloane. She slung the scythe over her shoulder, the crescent blade unblemished with blood. Although she stepped across cubes and rocks, her feet made no sound at all, made only the barest impression. The blank, empty expression became apologetic.
I'm so sorry about this.
In her other hand she kneaded Sloane's gem between thumb and forefinger.
You,
said Sloane.
You. I'm sorry this had to happen.
She unslung the scythe. The blade dangled near her feet, gently swaying with each step like the pendulum of an enormous clock. Erica. No, how could this happen, how could this be real? The mound of dirt and silt behind Omaha started to bloat. Distended clumps of soot inflated in doughy sacks. Sloane tilted her head and focused her bleary eyes, unable to comprehend what was happening anymore, unable to understand what magic this was. Unable to see anything but Erica's death. The mound bubbled until red cracks shone through the dirt. Omaha turned and let a small gasp of surprise as the mound burst. Through the exterior papering of dirt rushed a deluge of red liquid of blood. Omaha went invisible immediately, but as the blood crashed into her a slight void appeared in the flow where her body obstructed it. She floundered through the downpour as the narrow room filled, her legs splashing and her invisible body dripping. Sloane hoisted her upper body on her forearms to keep her chin above the line, but the moment the tide washed over the tendons of her legs all her wounds healed and she discovered herself capable of standing again. From the origin of the onrush rose a fey sorceress in a blood-splattered dress with blood-drenched hair and blood-stained skin. Raising aloft a staff bedecked with an immense ruby in her one remaining arm, Delaney Pollock cackled with wild spinning eyes as she stepped forth into the sloshing sanguine pool.
W. Watt.
Omaha had retreated to the edge of cave.
You died. I saw the Archon crush your soul gem.
Indeed, the gem clasped to the ravaged remains of Delaney's gown had smashed into 1,000 glittering pieces. But Delaney only laughed.
I am the modern Lazarus,
she said.
Neither heaven nor hell will take me. This can't be happening,
said Omaha.
You switched your gem with a fake.
Delaney tilted her head back in another aspirated laugh. Her wet hair slapped against her back.
Excellent deduction. But a trifle too late, dear. Ha 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 ha.
She turned her attention to Sloane.
Love, pass me my arm, will you? Arm.
The word plinked against the bottom of Sloane's esophagus. Delaney brandished her severed stump.
Yes, arm. It's a simple concept, love. Oh no you don't.
She aimed her staff at the small aperture in the ceiling and sealed it with a rubbery bubble. The dripping outline of Omaha, who had scaled half the wall, halted in its tracks against the same jutting rock used to avoid Winnipeg's final attack. As Sloane with stunned obedience sifted the bloody waters for the arm, Delaney's voice undulated in a possessed sing-song.
Omaha dear, you cannot simply escape. You're going to die Tilda.
She sashayed through the knee-high pond toward where Omaha clung like a housefly. Bloody handprints and the patter-patter of droplets signified her position perfectly.
Get down from there, you stupid bitch.
Delaney pulled back her arm and hurled her staff at the rock. It span through the air and shattered against the stone. In the waters below, a single splash accompanied Omaha's descent. Something clicked in Sloane's head and she processed the situation in a brief moment of clarity.
Delaney, you can't fight her, you don't have a weapon.
Delaney admonished her with a wagging finger.
Nuh-uh, love. I don't have a weapon for fighting wraiths, true. But for meddlesome little salamanders? I have just the thing.
She brushed back the ruined folds of her gown with a single sweep. From a small scabbard strapped to her thigh she drew a wavy dirk, either naturally red or red from the blood that seemed to have drowned everything in the narrow crevice. Sloane remembered the knife. Delaney had mentioned it during her tale of Claudia and the little dog. Seeing the tiny shiv in Delaney's feminine hand resolved none of Sloane's apprehensions.
She has a scythe, Delaney.
Sloane's hands sought the missing arm, found nothing.
You can't fight her with a knife. Worry not, love. I suspect without her cute vanishing act this girl's nothing but a fraud. Am I right, Omaha dear?
The placid pool made no response. Omaha had not moved in some time, but Delaney's gaze affixed unwavering to the spot where she had landed. She made cautious approach, the dagger agleam and scarlet. Without warning, she lashed out with the blade. At the same time, a lateral gash opened on Delaney's stomach and her innards tumbled out. The wound healed almost as soon as it occurred. The pool churned and splashed as Delaney jabbed her dagger down and across and all over with a series of progressive shrieks. More wounds opened across Delaney's skin, all healed instantly. Slit throats and disembowelments, lacerated torsos, and impaled rib cages. Delaney powered through the onslaught. Her dagger went up and down, but never did it strike anything. Even in unfavorable terrain, Omaha was slippery. Sloane was not about to watch another girl die. This time she had functional legs. She forgot Delaney's missing arm and charged. Her arms and legs powered through the coagulating pool as she aimed her entire bullet of a body at the disembodied splashing that struggled to escape Delaney's wrath. She hit Omaha when she expected, but not how she expected. Something hard and bony, an elbow, plowed into her skull and rattled her vision. She threw her arms around the small invisible torso as she tackled the writhing, kicking, screaming thing to the ground with a tremendous splash. Teeth and fingernails ripped at her face. Omaha cried, "No, no, don't do this to me, please, no." Sloane turned to Delaney.
Her soul gem is on a bracelet on her wrist.
Delaney received the news with inexorable glee as she kneeled beside them.
Left or right? I don't remember, just fuck her up,
said Sloane.
No, 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 I'm so sorry, please no. Stay back, or I'll destroy Sloane's soul gem, I have it in my hand right now.
The threat gave Sloane pause and she drew back a marginal degree. But Delaney snatched the empty air and wrapped her hand around something unseen and about the width of a bone.
Don't worry, love. Your soul gem's the last thing she'll destroy.
With calm and collected motions, despite the insanity etched on her face, Delaney wrangled with the invisible arm and pried something from it while the dagger waved wildly and uncomfortably close to Sloane's face. Once the object had left Omaha's grasp, it reappeared as Sloane's dirty gem, otherwise unharmed. Delaney tossed the gem with casual carelessness and Sloane struggled to catch it. It fumbled in her numb fingers but she managed to latch on and quickly bury it in a pocket.
Now to ruin this bitch.
Sobbing.
No, no, please no, no, no.
Delaney exhibited masterful control of only one arm as she pinned down Omaha's hand. She placed her knee against the arm to keep it against down. With one deft stroke she slashed the invisible wrist. She let up on the arm and allowed it to flounder to the surface. A steady fount of blood from an unseen source added to the volume of the pond.
Said Delaney. Wrong wrist.
She maneuvered for the other arm. As Delaney groped for the other arm, Omaha's body forced itself up against Sloane with exceeding and desperate force. Sloane lifted a little and for only a moment, but the split second was enough. Omaha thrashed out from under Sloane and sprinted away from the downward arc of Delaney's blade. From her wrist spurted a continual spray as she splashed to the other side of the cavern. As Omaha ran, a puff of dark magic enveloped the wound. When the antimatter dispersed, however, the wound sprayed only more blood.
No, said Omaha, it won't heal.
Delaney rolled her eyes.
Oh please, dear. Don't play dumb. As if who sent you forgot to inform you of the magical properties of my knife.
Magical properties, said Sloane as Omaha backed into another corner. Even when she stopped moving and no longer stirred the liquid around her, the constant stream from her wrist revealed her location. Delaney loosed another throaty, arid laugh.
Indeed, love. Any damage my dagger inflicts can never be healed, not even by yours truly. It's such a dinky worthless weapon, it's totally useless against wraiths, but prick a magical girl just right and she won't soon forget it. The exact weapon a depraved sociopath like me would have, don't you agree?
If the depraved sociopath line was meant to be ironic, Delaney made a poor case for herself. Sloane had the moment to realize that Delaney had lived. And Erica had died. A bitter unfairness seemed to seep from that simple fact. She remembered the hug between her and Winnipeg, how Winnipeg's facade had cracked and something real glimmered for a moment. Delaney had none of that. What she saw now, this cackling, wild-eyed harpy, this was the real Delaney, the Delaney minus her carefully constructed outer shell.
Well, no matter, said Delaney. Let's annihilate this pest, shall we, love?
Sloane clenched her fists. Delaney's gleeful abandon caused a leaden pit to form in her stomach, and despite the savagery with which Sloane had forced Omaha to the ground, Sloane could not bear to watch someone enjoy murder so much. She used her reclaimed soul gem to summon her gun and said, I'll do it.
Very well. I still have an arm to locate, after all.
Sloane waded through the bloody pool as Delaney flicked her arm and began to drain it into a dense liquid sphere. By the time Sloane had neared Omaha, only a thin red layer covered the sand. The unceasing dribble of Omaha's wrist made her easy to find. Faint sniffling filled the narrow chamber. Sloane pointed the gun at the invisible girl.
Show yourself. Hiding is pointless now. I'm so sorry, I. Shut up and show yourself.
After a mucus-infested snort and a few more stammered first-person pronouns, Omaha returned to the visible realm. She had folded into the corner, contorting her body as if to cram herself into the rivets between the rocks. One lens of her thick glasses had cracked and 1,000 images of her tear-streaked eye danced upon the glass. She cradled her wounded arm. Her pencil-thin legs pressed together at the knees and tucked inward under her insignificant body, more cloak than corp. She avoided eye contact.
I don't want to die.
In the background, Delaney gave a terse, bitter laugh as she magicked her blood back together. The soul gem on Omaha's unmarred wrist glimmered with a violet sheen only partially tarnished by blackness. She made no attempt to conceal it or defend it. One shot was all Sloane needed. She fingers touched the trigger but applied no pressure. Her eyes closed and she exhaled as she tried to drum up an image of Erica kneeling on the ground to stir her ire toward Omaha. Erica was dead. Omaha killed her. Kill Omaha. Instead, she said, "Who told you to do this?" She knew who told her. Kyubei had. He hired powerful but problematic girls to run an errand for him and kept Omaha on standby to clean up the scraps. Eliminate the Archon, eliminate willful and obstinate Winnipeg, eliminate irrational and sociopathic Delaney, eliminate murderous Sloane. Omaha sniffled. She buried her face deeper into the wall.
I. Tell me.
She knew it was Kyubei. Why harangue the girl over it? End this farce, do Omaha a favor and let her die with a few shreds of dignity. But Sloane could not do that. Why could she not do that? Why was it so difficult to understand her own dim emotions?
If I tell you, you'll kill me. If you don't tell, I'll kill you for sure.
Stop hesitating and pull the trigger. Delaney's bemused stare drilled into her back. Maybe if Sloane heard the words Kyubei told me, that would give an excuse to spare Omaha, an excuse to shift away the blame. Like, oh, this poor impressionable girl has no agency, it's all that asshole rat bastard pulling the strings as usual. Omaha did nothing wrong. Was that it, Sloane? Were you looking for an excuse to spare her? Were her tears getting to you, her begging? This girl murdered Erika, why does she deserve your mercy? Omaha stammered, cut. She should have let Delaney handle this. But somehow Sloane decided that would have been an even grander disservice to Erika.
Cut, Claire.
In an instant everything was forgotten, as if the past few seconds of mental turbulence never existed. A new, much more powerful emotion emerged as Sloane surged forward and seized Omaha by the throat. She slammed the small girl's head against the rock.
What was that? What did you just say? Say it again, louder.
Omaha's eyes oscillated with fear.
Cut. Louder. Cut, Claire, Ibsen.
Sloane's grip tightened. A wheeze choked its way through Omaha's lips as the soft pliable flesh compressed beneath Sloane's grasp.
Claire. Ibsen.
Claire Ibsen? Claire Ibsen? Claire Ibsen? How? How could it be her? How could it be her? Of all people, her? Her? Omaha struggled. Her legs flailed against the wall as Sloane yanked her up by the neck. She needed no magic to lift her, the girl was so small and breakable, so easy to shatter. It couldn't be Claire Ibsen, not Claire Ibsen, that was impossible, it was exactly what she had done before, oh my god, it was Minneapolis all over again, the coup redoubled, the preemptive revenge, how. She had followed her, helped her, been nice superficially on the surface, saved her, allowed her to kill the Archon, and then at the moment of triumph rob her of everything. The exact same fucking shenanigans. The exact same. She unleashed a primal roar and hoisted Omaha's limp body and slammed it into the ground. Omaha's fearful eyes widened as more phlegmatic wheezes choked their way out her gullet. Her feeble hands wrapped around Sloane's fingers and made pitiful effort to push them away. Claire Ibsen. Claire Ibsen had sent her. She had not even the decency to do the deed herself. She had hired a surrogate.
So Claire let us do the dirty work.
Sloane's voice trembled.
Take advantage of our exhaustion to eliminate us. And reap the cubes for herself.
Omaha's head bobbed up and down.
And she justified herself.
Sloane could see it now, Claire Ibsen with all her assistants and sycophants in arrangement, her arms waving with theatric, melodramatic flair as she defended her actions to great applause and esteem.
Because we're all dangerous. All dangerous magical girls, she was simply removing us as her duty to reason and order. That was what she said.
Omaha's eyes curled upward and spittle drooled down her agape mouth.
Wait, so Kyubei didn't send her?
Delaney, much cleaner although her gown still in shambles, leaned on her staff behind Sloane. She had reclaimed her arm.
Claire Ibsen,
said Sloane.
Claire Ibsen sent her. That backstabbing, opportunistic bitch.
She wished she could think of a word more powerful, more devastating than bitch, as though if she could find the right word it would somehow span the entirety of North Dakota and find its way to her in the crystal city of Minneapolis, and even if the word registered as only a pinprick on the tip of her finger she would feel it and Sloane would have heard her. Omaha's feet patted against the ground, her fingers tightened in the sand.
Well, fuck you Claire Ibsen. It didn't fucking work, I'm still here, and I'm coming to kill you.
She bellowed into Omaha's face. She lifted the girl again and smashed her into things, rocks, walls, whatever. She wanted to break. To pulverize. To avenge Erika, who had died for the scheme of such a petty, materialistic, empty, pedantic, pretentious, uppity, meretricious, traitorous bitch. Fresh tears streamed anew down Omaha's face. Sloane forced her to the ground and wrenched the soul gem bracelet off her wrist. As she bore down on Omaha's chest with her knee, she held the bracelet in front of Omaha's face.
I'm coming to kill you.
She released Omaha's neck and mashed the bracelet between her hands. The metal band bent and flexed as her hands awkwardly tried to smash the jewel embedded within. Omaha sobbed and stuttered the beginnings of words, beginnings with no ends.
There, love.
Delaney placed a reassuring hand on Sloane's shoulder.
Let it all out. Crush it, feel the catharsis.
Sloane's hands slipped over the slick metal and the bracelet flopped into the sand. Her trembling hands reached for it but stopped midway. Omaha sniffled, her eyes red and puffy, and for a moment Sloane stared at her with all the simplistic but persuasive emotions of rage and hatred scouring her body, blotting out sense and feeling. Tremors quivered through her veins. Her head filled with so many angry and unhappy thoughts and she realized her gem must be close to overload. Part of her wanted it to overload, to give in to despair like Winnipeg and disappear. But the shred of her remained that needed revenge on Claire Ibsen, needed to destroy Claire Ibsen. Instead of the bracelet, her hand snatched some of the cubes nearby. It took several swipes for her fingers to cooperate but she managed to clasp a good handful. Omaha sobbing beneath her, Sloane applied the cubes to her soul gem. Need to not die. Need to stay alive. Need to defeat Claire Ibsen. The tiny girl beneath her was not Claire Ibsen.
Sloane love.
Delaney kneeled beside her.
If it's too hard, I can finish her.
Sloane hung her head.
She's not Claire Ibsen.
Okay, said Delaney.
So. She does not deserve to die. What? She tried to kill us both. And succeeded in killing Winnipeg. Pretty damning, methinks. She is not the one to blame for this. Look at her.
Sloane could not believe herself, or what she was saying. But the rage ebbed away and revealed a pylon deep beyond the beach, a small jutting stone of compassion? Mercy? As they stared at the tear-streaked face of Omaha, with her cracked glasses and bleeding wrist and mousy sunken eyes and sallow skin, Sloane realized what it was. This girl was not Claire Ibsen, no. She was another victim, another pawn in Claire's schemes, because that was all anyone was to Claire. Claire had found the most pathetic, most insecure, most lonely girl in existence, a girl whose magical power was to disappear entirely. What kind of wish would cause that power, Sloane wondered. What kind of self-effacement could manifest itself in that way? Who knew what honeyed words dredged from the depths of Claire's broad vocabulary had been so pristinely eloquent to make Omaha think of her as a friend? No, not just a friend but a friend who
never got mad at her but nonetheless told her what questions she could not answer. Fake tears,
said Delaney.
I'm not sold on her story. Much more likely Kyubei's behind this. Notice his conspicuous absence.
Kyubei had become a nonentity in Sloane's mind, an abstract concept, a benign god only mildly concerned with the doings of humans. She tried to conceive of the motivations Kyubei might have for manufacturing such a scenario and could no longer. Maybe Delaney was right. Maybe Kyubei was behind it. The point stood. Omaha had been used. Like a gun, a sword. The mere instrument of another's plot.
I don't want to kill her,
said Sloane.
This is ridiculous, love. Even if you believe her for some reason, she's dangerous. We'll never know if she's following us. Plotting to assassinate us.
Wrong, said Sloane.
You said the wounds caused by your knife never heal. Which means you robbed her of her power to go undetected. No matter what she does, how much she bandages it, her wound will bleed and reveal her.
Omaha massaged her wrist and avoided looking either of them in the eye. She said nothing.
Better safe than sorry,
said Delaney.
Kill her and we know for sure she won't harm us. Oh yeah.
Sloane stood up.
Sound philosophy, Delaney. But why stop with Omaha? Why not kill anyone else that might harm us, too? Let's go and kill all the nomads in the area, and the girls from Calgary, and whoever else we can find that might want to hurt us, too. Let's go kill little dogs while we're at it. Good deeds, right? She killed someone, love. She killed Winnipeg. Fuck you,
said Sloane.
How convenient you showed up only after Erica died. Too bad you couldn't rise from the grave 5 seconds earlier to save her, too. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry,
Omaha ventured to mutter.
You're wrong,
said Delaney. She had almost completely turned away from Sloane.
I had to purify my soul gem before I made a move. I was depleted after the battle, if I rushed in without the magic to back it up. It just so happened.
Her voice dwindled, only to surge back as she realized something else.
Oh, but now she's Erica, is she? Now she's your friend, right? You knew her for less than a day. Tell me, Sloane love, do you even know her last name? She was a better person than you,
said Sloane.
After all I did for you. After all the times I saved you. Uh-oh, Delaney. Is that mild annoyance I sense in your voice? I better watch you don't kill me next.
Delaney balled her fists, one hand gloved and the other not. The same slight furrow that served as Delaney's sole negative facial expression re-emerged with a vengeance. She stared at Sloane as though ready to shout, but when she finally did speak her voice was calm and pleasant, as always.
I don't feel like fighting about this. Yes, I'm no paragon. I'm pretty awful, really. But I did not want Winnipeg, Erica, whoever she was, I did not want her to die. Please believe that, Sloane. Please believe me.
Things were getting too much. Sloane felt overwhelmed, exhausted. She wanted to sleep suddenly, although moments before her rage had consumed her with energy. Omaha, Delaney. Erica. Claire Ibsen. So many faces swirling in her head. She became cognizant that 30 minutes before she had waged war against an eldritch plant monster. 30 minutes before, Erica had been alive. Shit.
Okay,
she said. She did not want to cry. Anything but that.
I'll believe you, Delaney. But let's just let Omaha go.
Delaney allowed her hands to fall. She nodded, as if it meant nothing either way.
Okay.
With a wave, the bubble that sealed the hole in the roof disappeared. The early morning sunlight continued to shine, probably the last day of sunshine until March, as deep winter befell this edge-of-the-world frontier outpost. The sunshine only embittered Sloane. As if the world mocked her. As if it mocked Erica. Blood trickled from Omaha's lip. More streamed from the cut on her wrist, which she thumbed anxiously with her other hand.
Why, you're letting me go.
Sloane could hardly bear to face her.
Get out before I change my mind. Thank you.
Her feet scampered across the dirt. With practiced agility and balance she scurried up the rocks and slithered over the top of the chasm. Then she was gone, all gone, save a red trickle down the wall. Sloane knew she made a mistake. The war with Claire Ibsen had begun. Had already begun, before she even went to Williston. Claire had been a step ahead of her all along. Why had Sloane expected any different? How had she been foolish enough to believe she would appear in Minneapolis with the element of surprise? Of course not. To battle Claire Ibsen, she needed to expect every eventuality, predict every outcome, prepare for every possible scenario. Sloane needed craft and intelligence she did not possess, and failing that she needed ruthless brutality. Omaha was not out of the picture. Even if she returned to Claire wounded and defective, Claire would find a use for her. Claire was a female of extraordinary efficiency. To win, Sloane would need to crush each and every one of her tools, her tricks, her deceptions with unabated prejudice. And she just failed her first chance. She had given Claire back a weapon, regifted her a piece of her endless armory. But Omaha was not just a weapon, she was a girl, a living human being, abused and deceived as them all. As much weapon as hostage. Another helpless victim held tauntingly in a firing line. Despite being alive and with the cubes in her possession, she somehow felt she had lost to Claire anyway, made a devastating concession.
Fuck this, said Sloane. Fuck everything.
She turned to Delaney.
Let's gather these cubes and get the fuck out of here. As you wish, love.
Chapter 13, Wing of Wax. By the time they crawled out the crevice, Sloane wanted nothing more than sleep, long and endless. She did not want to think about Claire Ibsen, or Omaha, or Delaney, or even Erica. Her mind lacked the functional capacity for such thoughts. They surfaced in the slushy marshes outside town. The flat, characterless structures sat in bland and unassuming pointlessness. Sloane slouched toward Williston, chasing a dim awareness of a motel room to which they held the key, with a nice big bed. Delaney trudged after her. They did not speak. Sloane did not want to speak. Had Delaney waited until Erica died before she showed herself? Or had it been an honest coincidence? Sloane did not want to think. The miasma gone, the city now chilled her skin. She shoved her hands in the pockets of her jacket. Her eyes watched her boots as they trudged into a campground of small white tents like the kind in the hangar. Plaid-shirt men meandered as though this day were no different from the previous, as though their lives had not been in tremendous danger. They were only marginally more animated than under the miasma's spell. A few murmured among themselves in low tones. Eyes flitted toward Sloane and Delaney. Ragged, bloody, clothes torn. Sloane wondered if she was even recognizable as female, or if that even mattered. What kind of desperate motherfucker would try to make a move on her even in such a testosterone-overloaded locale, a Wild West cowboy tombstone with a 10-to-1 gender ratio?
Sloane, watch out,
said Delaney. Her hand flopped onto Sloane's shoulder and yanked her back as a brick of a metallic gray bus rumbled past with chugs of exhaust and squeals of suspension. Sloane rubbed her eyes, having completely missed the large and loud machine's approach. It lumbered to a stop, quite courteously blocking their path to the town. Half asleep, she swayed back into Delaney and tried not to doze as she waited for the bus to move. It did not move. Already a large crowd of plaid-shirt men had emerged from white tarp caves and formed a circle around the bus. Their voices buzzed with masculinity. Sloane had forgotten the male gender even existed. The glass-plated door of the bus opened with a hydraulic hiss. The horn honked as a bearded man in a ragged jacket emerged. The fingertips on his gloves had worn away and his cherubic face had the air of homeless about it. Nonetheless, he had somehow commandeered captaincy of this bus and now sauntered down the steps with a broad smile on his face and his arms held high.
Gather round, gents, gather round.
More figures bustled in the bus behind him, shrouded by tinted glass.
Enough here for one and all, ain't it the truth? Step right up, form a line, nice and orderly now, yup. Just like that.
The plaid-shirt men fumbled through their pockets and retrieved threadbare leather wallets. Gloved or bone-white fingers fished for limp bills.
What is this shit?
Sloane muttered to Delaney.
Let's go.
But Delaney's hands, placed gingerly on Sloane's shoulder, held firm.
I wonder how much he's asking, she said. For what?
A raucous cheer rose from the dull and muted men whose upraised arms clenched wads of cash and waved with frenzied intensity. The bearded not quite hobo hollered amounts, cupping his mouth to carry over the sea of malodorous men. Elbows jutted into Sloane's sides and she tugged at Delaney's hoodie to get her moving.
How much?
Delaney shouted. Her voice pierced the din with remarkable clarity.
How much are you charging?
The bearded man on the steps swung outward, throwing his arm like an orator above the crowd. His eyes locked onto Delaney and he loosed a gregarious laugh.
Aha! You mosey right along, little missy. This ain't business for your eyes, no sir.
A fussed and heaving plaid jacket jostled Sloane aside as she stood on tiptoe to figure out what the man was even selling or why he seemed so damn familiar. She thought it must be his general similarity to every single man in this entire state, grody and hairy and decked in the same Paul Bunyan apparel, but as he continued to hawk his wares the realization dawned on her, scattered memories swam to the surface. Fargo, convenience store, late at night, a job offer. It had been less than 2 days ago, how could she have forgotten? But if this were the man who had first told her of Williston, that meant he was selling. The first women appeared from the bus in a flock of feathered boas. The crowd went insane, veritably bonkers. They crawled over each other to force their cash in the face of the laughing bearded man, who pulled his furred floppy-eared cap off his head and started collecting payment en masse. The cap overflowed with greenbacks as he ushered the women off the bus to be bagged for the customers. Bills fluttered through the air, but even the loose 20s went ignored as far more precious material entered the economy. Sloane had enough of this. She hooked her hand into Delaney's collar and dragged her away, using her other arm to batter a path through the plaid-shirt men. Delaney struggled but gave in eventually.
Those prices are insane, she said as they cleared the crowd. That guy must have a stranglehold on the market.
Thrilling, said Sloane. This was the place she saved. These were the people for whom Erica died. The sacrifice of a 12-year-old girl allowed these men to purchase flesh with dollar bills. They continued unaccosted until they reached the motel. No trail of blood, no Omaha. A quick sweep of the premises and Sloane decided the perimeter was clear. She flopped onto the bed and burrowed her face into the pillow. Thank God for crippling fatigue, or else she probably would have been unable to sleep as thoughts of Erica and Claire churned in her brain. Instead, she emptied her mind. Emptied herself. Melded. became cognizant of only the plushy down of the blanket and pillow, of the pleasant tinkling of grief cubes as Delaney unloaded their weighty hoard onto the nearby bureau.
Love, pass me your gem, we'll get it spick and span by the time you wake up.
With a vague murmur, Sloane fished out her soul gem and tossed it to Delaney. A reckless way to handle her most vital organ, but fuck. If Delaney wanted her dead, she was in no state to resist either way. Delaney did not crush her gem. She gently set it on the bureau, amid the cube mountain. Excess cubes slid down in small avalanches and scattered on the carpet. When they collected them in the cave, they had estimated at least 200. 200 cubes. If rationed, that was nearly a 3-month supply. 3 months without fighting a single wraith. One way or another, Sloane did not expect to be around another 3 months. Once she killed Claire, who cared what happened after? A pleasant soothing sensation filled her as her soul gem forcibly expelled its grief into the throng of cubes. The streams were strong, not like the faint trickles that had plagued her in Fargo, which had made amelioration impossible even after large hauls. She nuzzled her head against the pillow and drifted. Drifted. Fingers caressed the small of her back, just another comfort amongst the others that enveloped her, so she did not resist as fingertips became hands, pressing deep against her, massaging her. It was easy to forget about Omaha, forget about Erica as the hands moved to her shoulders, pushed deep and hard, kneaded frozen joints and rack-tortured tendons. It was easy to imagine the hands as connected to nothing. Just floating hands, animated by dream logic. She sighed a little as the hands needed a too tight muscle.
There love, you'll feel better soon.
Cooed a pleasant female voice Sloane had no trouble detaching from its true owner and ascribing to some sort of natural or spiritual presence. She felt warm breath on the nape of her neck, a balmy breeze through the boughs as the springs of the mattress squeaked birdsong, and another body lay down beside her, a doe, warm and peaceful. The therapeutic hands did wonders to her neck, then wrapped around her shoulders and worked her décolletage. Sleep closed in now, blissful, harmonic sleep. Only when the hands slid a little further and grabbed something inappropriate, rather, two somethings, did Sloane's eyes snap open. She whirled around on the bed and pushed herself away from the groping hands, her feet kicking as she scrunched up the blankets and nearly toppled off the side.
What is it, what's wrong, love?
Said Delaney. She quickly rose to a kneeling position.
What the fuck are you doing? I'm making you feel better.
Delaney peered at her with two innocent eyes. Sloane noticed that one eye was bright blue and the other was red. Had her eyes always been two different colors? Never mind that, she had other concerns.
Making me feel better? Making me feel better.
Delaney wrung her hands.
I know you and Erica developed a bond at the end, and I know her death hurt you a lot. I just thought. You thought what? That you wouldn't have to pay so much if you settled for me instead of those whores outside. So, you mean, you don't like girls?
Sloane stood up and gesticulated wildly.
You are missing the point. Missing the point entirely. That fact that you don't understand how fucked up you are is unreal. Erica is dead and that is the first thing on your mind? That you act like I did it for me. I was trying to make you happy.
Words dissolved half-formed in Sloane's mind as she tried to construct them into an argument more coherent than strained screaming. She could not conceive of a creature more repugnant, more disgusting than the pale, kneeling wretch on the bed before her. She slammed her hand down on the bureau and fumbled for her soul gem. She would grab it and her cut of the cubes and leave. No time to waste anyway, she wanted to make it to Minneapolis before Omaha and maybe salvage some modicum of surprise to game the odds in her favor. Fuck fatigue. What had Erica said? Magical girls don't need sleep, they don't need food. They just need cubes, everything else is mental. An adage Sloane could live by. Would have to live by, now that her war against Claire Ibsen had officially begun. She rubbed her eyes as she shoved cubes into her many pockets. They weighed heavy in her jacket.
Oh no, Sloane, don't leave, you're in no state to go.
Delaney rushed to her side and held her hands out, not daring to touch Sloane as she tromped toward the door.
Look, I'm sorry, I miscalculated. I thought you would be more amenable to the advance. Okay? I made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake, Delaney, said Sloane. You are the mistake.
A hit, a palpable hit. Delaney nearly crumpled under the verbal barb.
Okay. Look, don't leave on my account. I'll leave. Stay here and sleep, clean up, Whatever. You deserve it more than I do.
Part of Sloane wanted to reject her pity out of obstinance, but the other part was still saying please sleep and wouldn't mind keeping the room. So much for everything is mental. She wavered on the blunt edge between spite and sensible, which was just enough time for Delaney to make the decision for her by absconding out the motel door without another word. She did not even bother to take her share of the cubes, or maybe she had never unloaded her share at all. That left Sloane alone in the room. Alone. For the first time since she encountered Omaha on the bus in Bismarck, probably. Funny how she had gone so long alone in Fargo without so much as a dent, and how she had gone so long in Minneapolis basically alone, with only tangential human connections with her family, with her peers, with anyone save Claire Ibsen, but now she was alone, truly alone for all of 5 seconds, and she no longer wanted to be alone. She flopped back onto the bed and tried to conjure again the sylvan scene, the tranquility, the alleviation of agony, but the spell was broken. The bed revealed itself a hard and lumpy spring-laden contraption, her body ached, and the cubes only did so much. She closed her eyes and saw Erica's final moment, their 1 minute gone the next. Truly dead. Sloane curled up with an injustice she could barely comprehend, an injustice of the entire magical girl system, the entire embryo to power plant Ponzi scheme the incubators had running here in this orchard of hell called Earth. She thought she would never get to sleep, but she was wrong. Sloane woke stiff and sore and with a beleaguered groan. She rolled over as her unctuous mind reconstructed the present situation. Archon dead. Winnipeg dead. Delaney and Omaha at large. The last slant of daylight filtered through the window. She had been out all day and God had she needed it. She worked the gunk out of her joints and powered through the stiffness with a lot of yawning and stretching. Her fingers excavated eye jam as she peered out the window, no longer so black as it had been in the miasma. A small alley between a drugstore greeted her. Below, crumpled between garbage bags, lay the corpse that had hung from their closet. Winnipeg had dumped him out the window. Sloane would do best to leave before people discovered him. Erica was dead. She did not deserve it, but neither had most of the millions of magical girls who had died before her. Sloane had to keep moving. She had to defeat Claire, and to defeat Claire she needed to drop all baggage, all emotion. The more she told herself these things, the more true they became. Her soul gem was 100% clear, a perfect golden gem with the slightest hint of translucence. It had always reminded her of fossilized amber, except without the mosquito trapped inside. But her gem now was not simply clear, unless her memory of its perfect state were faulty, a distinct possibility. It glowed. Its effulgence spread over the grief cubes piled mountainous at its feet. She scooped it up and examined closer. Its brightness hurt her eyes and she needed to look away. When she did, she saw Cube staring at her from the windowsill. He pushed open the pane and slid through, shutting the window behind him with his tail. "Good afternoon, Sloane.
You've been gone a while."
"My presence was more efficiently used elsewhere. You 3 managed to handle yourselves fine without me. Congratulations, by the way. You really exceeded expectations."
"You sent Omaha to terminate us."
Cube hopped onto the carpet and snaked his way for the spent grief cubes. "It appears Omaha was sent by your old ally, Miss Ibsen. You should know, however, that Miss Ibsen had every intention for Omaha to spare you."
"Of course," said
Sloane.
"Just like in Minneapolis. So she can act like the hero for letting me live, and make me the villain for wanting her dead. Of course."
She sifted through the cubes in search of ones still unused, but the entire top layer had been spent to purify her gem. "I would apologize for not warning you about Miss Omaha's intentions, or her connection with your old adversary, but my primary goal was the defeat of the Archon, and her presence increased the chance of that happening. Miss Erica and Miss Delaney, and even yourself, were considered acceptable losses if the primary goal were accomplished."
"Never change, Cube."
She had reached the bottom of the pile, but every single cube had been used. Had her despair been that strong? That could not be possible. Cube hopped onto the bureau. The alien mouth on his back opened up and began vacuuming up the spent cubes in a process neither mechanical nor biological and which Sloane did not care to watch. "By the way, you'll notice your soul gem is in remarkable condition. You could consider it in a supercharged state, if you will. You used far more grief cubes than were necessary, but fortunately, cubes do not simply go to waste if they have no more despair to consume." Sloane examined her gem.
"So you're saying it, like, gave me anti-despair?"
"Kinda. Despair and its counteragent, hope, are simply sources of energy for which your soul gem is a conduit. Slurp suck shloop went Kyubei's mouth as he rolled across the rest of the gems. He used his tail to sweep them in for greater efficiency. Once the cubes had no more despair to take, they began to charge your gem with hope. This is an extremely rare state, because it's not often magical girls acquire so many grief cubes at once.
I don't feel particularly joyful or whatever, said Sloane.
Joy and hope aren't the same thing. You can live a miserable existence but still have tons of hope for the future. Or you can be happy but not hopeful at all. That's generally called complacency. Really, it's difficult even for humans to convert so much hope into raw emotion. I advise burning it off as magical energy. He sucked up the last few cubes on the bureau and hopped onto the carpet for the stragglers. Sloane regarded the vibrant aura of her gem.
So you mean like, fire my gun a lot? That kind of magical energy?
With so much power at your disposal, you may even be able to do things you would be incapable of doing normally. When Miss Delaney reaped the spoils of the Archon in Saskatoon 3 years ago, she developed many of the abilities she employs now. She was actually only a magical girl of middling promise before that. Then there was a magical girl in Japan who gained so much magical energy. He droned on, but Sloane stopped listening. Extreme magical energy. The exact ace she needed for the upper hand on Claire. She pocketed the gem. No sense dallying longer. She was filthy, but a shower could wait. She needed to strike fast, quick, and with brutality.
Pleasure doing business, Kyubei,
she said as she opened the door. His red eyes stared at her. The pleasure is all mine. Au revoir, Williston, she thought as she embarked on foot down the highway. The squat structures and remarkable lack of anything remarkable whatsoever would not be missed, and Sloane did not bother to glance over her shoulder for one last memento. Her thoughts turned elsewhere. Kyubei was right, it was possible to feel hope and still be miserable. On one hand, she had defeated the Archon, she had absorbed its power, and she now marched on toward Minneapolis to fulfill a dream so long etched into the rivets of her brain it felt the culmination of her entire life. At the same time, her thoughts kept tilting unbidden toward Erica, who was dead. The word dead sprung up over and over and over again and she could not repel it. Erica was not walking away from Williston. She was not walking anywhere. She told herself, that's the risk, that's life as a magical girl. Nasty, brutish, and short, emphasis on the short. Winnipeg had been on the block long enough to know what was at stake with her every action. At some points she had seemed to know better than Sloane herself. So Sloane had to move on, banish Erica from her mind, focus on the task ahead. It's never so simple, of course. Whatever. She stuck out her hand and raised a thumb. One side of the highway was clogged with vehicles, but it was not her side. Not a single vehicle to be seen exiting the city. They all went in, pilgrims in search of profit from brittle and useless fuel. She had a hard time not thinking about things she did not want to think about when she had little to hold her interest beyond a desolate landscape and a frigid chill. She wished she had taken the time to bathe, since she looked a wreck. When she entered Minneapolis, she wanted to make an impression. Like something magnificent, something to behold. On a lone dead tree on the side of the road, a single crow caught and took flight. Sloane walked. And walked. And walked. Once the town had shrunk to a spattering of silhouettes, a wrinkle on an otherwise level horizon, she heard the whir of an engine behind her. She stuck her thumb out again as a small jeep rumbled toward her. She held her breath as she waited for it to either stop or rush past in a blur. The jeep slowed and stopped, although Sloane felt no relief as she noticed the Saskatchewan license plate on the front of the vehicle. The passenger side window rolled down and Delaney Pollock leaned over from the driver's seat. Both of her eyes were once again blue.
Hey, love. This'll be the last time we meet, so if you got something to say, spit it out. Actually.
Delaney unlocked the passenger side door and pushed it open.
I was thinking I could give you a ride. I ain't going to Canada. You sure? Winnipeg's territory will need someone to fill the void. You would be a perfect fit, the city's big enough. I'm going to Minneapolis.
Delaney sighed. A long, exaggerated sigh mostly for dramatic effect.
I know. I figured I'd mention it nonetheless. Goodbye, Delaney.
Sloane began to walk again. The jeep lurched forward and rolled alongside her with the door ajar.
Wait, wait. Hop in. I'll drive you to Minneapolis.
Sloane stopped. She eyed Delaney suspiciously. The first thought that entered her mind was, naturally, how much a skilled healer/defender would aid her cause. Not to mention that nasty girl crippling trick with the knife. Of course, to have Delaney's powers meant having Delaney the person too.
You have territory. I'm not particularly wedded to it, said Delaney. Look, we can spend all day dickering over this, or you can hop in and we get going. It'll be hours before you find someone else leaving the town, and odds are they aren't going where you want to go. If they pick you up at all. No offense, but you look like maniac, love.
Heavy trench coat, burn marks, covered in oil, sleep-deprived baggy eyes. Yeah, pretty much.
Sure, whatever,
said Sloane.
I'll get in if you answer one question. Why are you helping me? Because you're going to get yourself killed doing something very, very foolish. And I don't want that to happen. Because that's what friends do, right?
She smiled her sweet innocent smile that Sloane knew well enough by now meant nothing at all. The answer probably meant as little, and Sloane wondered what honestly she had expected. Friends. Did Sloane and Delaney count as friends? Could Delaney count as anyone's friend? Sloane shrugged. Objectively considered, the benefits Delaney brought as an ally far outweighed her detriments as a human being. And that was what Sloane needed to be now, objective. Cold. Distant. She had let her guard down and allowed Erica Winnipeg to worm her way in. Her punishment for her mistake had been swift and severe. Claire Ibsen would exploit any and all connections Sloane had, so better she had no connections. Better she had a companion she would be willing to shed at a moment's notice. Better to exploit Delaney's bizarre desire to do good deeds just as Claire had exploited Omaha. She climbed into the jeep and shut the door. Thin snowfall peppered the street in front of them, just enough for Delaney to engage her wipers. Calm, melodic mood music wafted from the speakers as the jeep started forward, and their journey toward Minneapolis began. In a distant land. Homura Akemi lay on her back on the couch in her living space, her hands locked into a honeycomb and the pendulum tick-tock ticking in her mind as she thought about Madoka Kaname. Time until their next meeting, 37 minutes and 7 seconds. 37 minutes and 6 seconds. 37 minutes end. It would be easy, triflingly easy, for Homura to rewrite the rules until Madoka and her were never apart. Or even simply abduct her, place her in a cage, wipe her mind of all memory of friends and family and replace it with only her, Homura Akemi, Madoka's staunch devotee and worshipper, her acolyte, her apostle, her servant master. But that would not work. Homura knew that. Homura could survive with Madoka alone, but Madoka could not survive with Homura alone. That was the truth of Madoka's being, her very essence, and was what constantly awed Homura to begin with. Her compassion, her genuine love for all people and living creatures. To cut Madoka away from the living, breathing world and trap her in a box with the most wretched and undead abomination on the face of the planet would be cruelty beyond measure. So although it pained Homura, she allotted ample time for Madoka to be with others. In the beginning it had been both her family and her other friends, but now it was mostly just her family. Right now was family dinner time. Madoka would tell her father and mother and brother about her day, and they would tell her about theirs, all over a warm, home-cooked meal. For laughing, happy people, Madoka brightest among them gathered around a kitchen table, nourishing Madoka as much with food as with the interpersonal relations that meant so much to her. It was Homura's duty to forbear these desolate interludes. Usually she scheduled her meetings with the incubator at these times, but today. A knock upon her door. Homura shot up. Had Junko stayed late at the office again? Had Tomohisa truncated the usual dinner? And had Madoka, of her own volition, returned to Homura to spend an extra half hour before they went wraith hunting through the city together? She wrenched open her door and immediately regretted not having checked the peephole first. Quickly she composed herself with her usual aloof expression.
"Tomoe," she said.
Mami Tomoe stood at the door, wearing a yellow tracksuit that only she of all people in the world could make fashionable. Under one arm she held a matching helmet with a brim and visor, and despite the implication that recently she had worn said helmet, her hair remained a perfectly coiffured collection of curls. Homura did not need the reports of her dolls, who saw and recorded everything, to know Tomoe was vain enough to waste magic for maintenance of her ridiculous hairstyle. Tomoe gave a pleasant nod and smiled warmly.
"Good evening, Miss Akemi. How are you today?" "I'm fine," said Homura.
Parked against the curb behind Tomoe was the garish yellow scooter she had purchased when she moved on to high school. On the back seat, wearing a helmet identical to Tomoe's and kicking her feet aimlessly, was Tomoe's young ward, Nagisa. She did not pay a special attention to either Tomoe or Homura, concerned more with her shoes than anything else.
I am happy to hear it, said Tomoe. It's been quite some time since I last heard from you or Miss Kaname in much detail. I was worried something may have befallen you, so I decided to pay a brief visit.
Homura narrowed her eyes.
We're fine. Well then, would the two of you care to join Nagisa and I tonight? The wraiths have been growing more numerous as of late. It would probably be safer if we stayed in larger groups, don't you think?
Excuse me, I'm busy at the moment, said Homura. She began to close the door. Tomoe stepped forward.
Wait, please. I don't mean to intrude. I'm genuinely worried about the two of you. Ever since Miss Kaname transferred here from the United States, you've grown more and more distant. I know we were never especially close friends, but there's no reason to be strangers.
Homura said nothing. She knew Tomoe's real reason for coming. While in the early days, Homura had attempted to keep the 6 magical girls of Magica in close alignment, several factors had necessitated their fragmentation into 3 groups of 2 to maximize overall stability. Homura and Madoka, Tomoe and Nagisa, Miki, and Sakura. Tomoe's real problem, which she kept concealed behind her pleasantries and vitreous smile, was that she worried she was being left alone yet again. If only Tomoe simply came out and said what was on her mind, Homura might feel some pity for her. Instead, she simply wanted the conversation finished.
That's what happens when people go to different schools, she said. They fall out of contact. You still have Nagisa.
At the mention of her name, Nagisa quit puttering her feet and looked up. The bright yellow helmet made her head seem oversized and bulbous, and the expression on her face indicated she was none too pleased to wear it. Nonetheless, she flashed Homura a quick smile and then resumed her aimless kicking. Of the 4 interlopers whose lives Homura had to micromanage lest they become irrational and slash or die, Nagisa was the most tolerable. Her biggest problem in life was her dead mother, but pairing her with Memi Tomoe more or less fixed that. Her second biggest problem in life was the procurement of cheese. If only Sayaka Miki could be placated by consumer commodities, how much easier Homura's life would be. On top of that, in a previous universe during however many endless time cycles in which Homura had grown to see the absolute worst aspects of the other 3 derangement, murder, insanity, Nagisa had actually been fairly useful, having in occasional timelines chomped off Tomoe's head, delaying Madoka from contracting for a few weeks. All that was ancient history, of course. Homura tried not to attach sentimental meaning to past events. The stark reality now was that if Nagisa or the others regained their memories, they would clamor for Homura's head and consign Madoka to an unfair fate while they acted as if they cared or even knew what Madoka wanted, as if they understood at all what their actions would do to her. Homura blinked. The entire time, Tomoe had been talking, and now looked to Homura in expectation of a response. Probably she had said nothing more than inane pleasantries.
I'm busy at the moment, said Homura.
Tomoe expelled a ladle-like sigh.
Very well. I'll not pester you further, Miss Akemi, you have made yourself clear. But do know that I am genuinely concerned for you and Miss Kaname. If either of you ever wish to enjoy some tea at my place, you're welcome to come anytime. Please pass the message along to her.
I'll do that, said Homura. She had zero intention of doing that. As she began to close the door again, Tomoe thought of something else to blabber about.
Wait, Miss Akemi. One final thing. I have noticed as of late that Miss Sayaka Miki seems to be distressed. I've tried to speak to her and perhaps sound out the problem, but she's been rather resistant. I thought perhaps you might have better luck with her.
Homura stood still in the doorway for a while and stared at Tomoe. What was that supposed to mean?
Why would I have better luck than you? I don't know. You just seem to have a knack for those sorts of things. Anyway, I'll not keep you any longer, Miss Akemi. Farewell. I hope we see each other again soon.
She turned sharply on a heel and returned with elegant stride to her scooter, her curls bouncing with each buoyant step. Nagisa muttered something to her as she approached.
No cheese until you finish your homework, baby,
Tomoe replied. Nagisa showed how much she cared for this response by donning her biggest pouty face, which Tomoe tactically ignored as she started the scooter and put on her helmet. Nagisa's pout only deepened as the circumstances of their transportation forced her to wrap her arms around Tomoe's waist and hold on as the scooter put-putted down the road and rounded a corner. Homura waited until they were completely gone before shutting the door and returning to her room. What did Tomoe mean by her parting remark? What reason did she have to believe Homura had a knack for any kind of social activity at all? Could she possibly suspect that Homura was manipulating their day-to-day livelihoods from the shadows? Could that be what she meant? There was no reason at all to think Homura would have any more success with Sayaka Miki than Tomoe had. But she had made the remark nonetheless. What did she know? How did she know it? No, calm down. You're being paranoid again, Homura. It was an off-the-cuff remark, mere politeness more than anything else, the typical meaningless nicety that comprised Tomoe's entire lexicon. Or more likely it had been simple bait to lure Homura, and by extension Madoka, out into the open to fill the voids in Tomoe's pointless life via endless tea parties and cake-baking sessions. That was it, that was the entire subtext, if there had even been subtext at all. At the same time, she knew Tomoe was capable of surprising feats of intelligence. She should not underestimate her. Perhaps she could have the doll Itelkate probe deeper. Yes, that was what she would do. That was the logical and reasonable solution, acquire additional intelligence rather than stress over unknowns and possibles. Just as she had done in 1,000 moribund timelines. The incubator emerged from behind the shadow of the pendulum on the far side of the room. He remained on the tenebrous cusp and swayed his tail to the time of the clock.
You're late,
Homura said. Unblinking eyes gazed in her direction. We decided to wait until after Miss Tomoe's interruption.
She's gone now. So talk.
Efficient as always, the incubator began. He rattled off the relevant vital statistics of the day as Homura listened with only tentative interest. Standard number of deaths. Standard number of contracts. Standard distribution of deaths/contracts across the first and third world. Syrian conflict on the rise. Everything in order, everything continuing month-long trends or else explained by a predictable abnormality. Homura paced around her floating bulletin board, upon which the statistics emerged as documents, giving each paper the once-over so her enlarged, near-godlike mind could process the information. As was her custom, she looked over the list of Magicides, only 25 today, and gauged their severity. All standard. All normal.
Very well,
she said. The incident with Tomoe had delayed things and Madoka was set to arrive in a few minutes. Homura needed to clean herself up before then.
You're dismissed.
There's one more thing. Yesterday you expressed interest in a follow-up report on the Williston incident, yes? Williston. The small town in North Dakota. With the infestation and the 3 girls. Yes, she supposed she had some interest in that. A new paper materialized before her. She swept it up in a hand and examined it. The infestation had been quelled. The miasma had dissipated. The fates of the 3 girls enlisted: Delaney Pollock, 78.7% chance of survival according to the incubator's previous report, alive. Erica Dufresne, 44.0% chance of survival, deceased. Sloane Redfern, 4.1% chance of survival, alive.
Redfern is the girl you specifically enlisted so that she could be terminated, said Homura. She is a high-class magicide risk. Her profile indicates an obsessive desire to murder another magical girl. Why is she alive?
A 4.1% chance, while unlikely, is entirely within the realm of possibility.
I am aware.
She examined the paper closely. She did not like this. The girl who most needed to die had survived. No, worse than survived. According to the report, she now had a supercharged soul gem and had embarked on a one-way journey to Minneapolis with the help of the other survivor, Pollock. This was in fact very, very problematic. She didn't buy the 4.1% chance. When dealing with probabilities on a global scale, it was of course entirely unsuspicious. Girls had survived far worse chances than that, chances even in the billionth of a percent. After all, somebody does win the lottery. A 4.1% chance was the perfect way to disguise something as improbable before the fact and defend it as possible afterward. And she did not trust the incubator to be forthright about his intentions. But when she pulled another paper to the fore and examined in excruciating detail the formula and variables that had been considered in creating that 4.1% chance, she found the incubator's methodology infallible. He had not deviated from the standard in any way. The list of variables stretched into the millions, but Homura was able to process them instantaneously. Everything had been considered, down to the probability of Redfern getting into a fatal car crash en route to the city. She pored over the variables for something the incubator had omitted. Perhaps he had ignored the impact Pollock, a skilled healer, would have on Redfern's survival? No, even that had been considered. In fact, Pollock's influence was the reason Redfern had a 4.1% chance and not a 0.0007% chance. She reached the bottom of the list after a few seconds of stringent mental processing. No variable had been ignored. The influence of both Pollock and Dufresne were included. Dufresne actually lowered Redfern's chance. By every conceivable measure, Redfern had only a 4.1% chance of survival. Which meant her actual survival was pure luck. The incubator watched her with his same smug expression as she turned to other files. Probed deeper into Williston for some irregularity, some glitch. How had Dufresne died? Law of the cycles after expending too much energy. That made sense. And Pollock's survival had been expected in the beginning. She brought up documents detailing critical events during the battle with the Abraxas Archon. Crippling blows dealt by Redfern and Dufresne, necessary healing and protection by Pollock. Everything added up, everything made sense. It just so happened that a lucky 4.1% chance had screwed up so much.
You staked the possibility of Redfern becoming incredibly powerful on a 4.1% chance, she said. That seems unlike you, Incubator.
Indeed. Under normal circumstances, I would never risk so much on such a percentage. Unfortunately, we have severely fallen below energy quotas and have resorted to desperate measures to maximize intake. A 4.1% chance was deemed sufficiently low enough for the reward of bypassing the cost of hiring a magical girl to terminate Miss Redfern. Unfortunately, the risk has backfired. Had our energy production methods not been so extremely regulated.
You mean that you were willing to gamble on a 4.1% chance so Redfern could be empowered to kill Ibsen and thus create even more energy?
Manipulating magical girls to kill one another to increase production is one of your staunchest prohibitions.
I am aware.
Madoka would arrive any minute and Homura grew tired of this conversation. She had brought up a paper on the Abraxas Archon itself. It had not, as she supposed, been created from the oil drilling in the area and the squalid conditions of the town's denizens. It had instead been created via Magicide. 3 days ago, in fact, Lily Chong had murdered Gwendolyn Richards in Williston. Had Homura somehow missed this? Another file came to the fore, Magicides from 3 days ago. No, there it was, the third entry on the list, Lily Chong and Gwendolyn Richards. Cause, accidental killing during a minor argument. A cause that should never have provoked an Archon manifestation, and which had seemed entirely benign when it had first been brought to Homura's attention. What was going on here? She probed deeper. Lily Chong had a power that caused all pain dealt to her to be dealt back to her attacker twofold. Gwendolyn Richards had actually been the aggressor, and killed herself by accident. This was becoming complicated, and Homura had no idea how any of it related to Sloane Redfern. It only deepened her suspicion that the incubator was planning something. But what? Her door knocked. She jolted away from her papers. It was Madoka, this time she knew.
Terminate Redfern, said Homura. Hire one of your specialty girls. I don't care about the cost.
As you command. No discomposure in the incubator's voice, no indication that this was anything other than an expected outcome. Was that his usual stoicism or was she blundering into a trap? A paranoia she had not felt for a long time had surged back into her. She needed to break away, to be with Madoka. Madoka would calm her, allow her to think more reasonable and rational. In the interim, the key was ensuring Sloane Redfern's death. The door knocked again. Madoka's voice chimed from the other side,
Homura? Are you there? Just a moment.
She called back as she headed for the door.
You're dismissed, Incubator.
The incubator had already disappeared. End first arc. Chapter 14, A Damsel with a Dulcimer. Second arc, Minneapolis. 14, A Damsel with a Dulcimer. Cornflakes again. Wait, no cornflakes, some shitfuck had ate them all and put the empty box back in the cupboard, thanks asshole. Thanks a fucking lot.
Who fucking did this, said the girl called Bloomington.
Her voice reverberated through the house.
Who fucking ate all the cornflakes?
The house settled with a creak and a moan. In a distant room, a war between lions and Vikings raged. Who even lived in this house, Bloomington wondered. Certainly not her family. She scoured the kitchen for leftovers, microwave shit, fucking caloric content of any kind, even motherfucking she tried to think of a completely unpalatable food, even motherfucking collard greens, she was so fucking hungry. She checked her phone. Late. Always late. Ignoring her hunger, she stole through the house to the side window with the crack in it and jimmied her fingers under the wooden frame. You ever try opening a shitty window without getting splinters or lead poisoning? Bullshit, absolute bullshit. But Bloomington had mastered the delicate art. Steady pull, ensure the fingers don't slip. The window creaked open with nary a sound. She had the window up and one leg over the side when, like Jason motherfucking Voorhees, her mom hurtled around the corner waving a carving knife in a series of severe stabbing motions, screaming Alyssa Ray Coles, get right back in this house this minute, with her bathrobe flapping against her ashy ankles and the curls in her hair bobbing and jangling. Bloomington scrammed the fuck out of there, but her back leg snagged the windowsill and she tripped and staggered into the frost-covered weeds. A rusted and half-buried tool or implement jabbed into her ribs and she rolled over with a pained oof. Her mother leaned out the window and brandished the knife. You bad girl you, she screamed. Doing the devil's work. The devil. Bloomington pulled herself up and kept clear of the arc of her mother's knife.
I already told you, Ma, I ain't no fucking whore.
She backed toward the chain-link fence as she brushed dirt from her parka. In her haste she had forgot her mittens and the wintry night chill numbed her fingers. She shoved hands into pockets and expelled a white breath that evaporated in the yellow beam of the window and the silhouette of her lunatic mother. You ain't need to be paid to be a whore. Ain't no girl out this time of night up to no good.
Bye, Ma,
said Bloomington. She hopped the chain-link fence and burrowed her neck in the fur trim of her parka as she disappeared down the sidewalk. Her mother's curses nipped at her back. At night, in the frigid effervescence beneath a starless sky, the city grew unworldly. At uncertain distances rose blazing towers, pillars of yellow light, while in the slick and ice-paved streets the buildings could vanish behind wayward puffs of frost fog. Bloomington shivered even under all her layers, the ski cap, the parka, the jacket, the 3 extra shirts, the burgundy sweatpants from her PE class and the insulated layer of long-legged underwear, the woolen stockings and the thick-soled boots. Under all that her dry prune body trembled with an electric spark, her skin turned to brittle ash and the few small hairs on her flesh straight and bristling. Her nose started to run, which she hated worst of all, because your options for a runny nose boiled down to A, tissue, which you either didn't have or which rubbed the bridge between the nostrils raw and red, B, your hand, which was disgusting and left long green streaks along your fingers, or C, snorted up, where it seemed to go straight to your brain and clog your neural passages until you had to lie down from the migraine. And if you let it run, the snot dribbled onto your lip and froze into chunky serrated shards. She compromised by digging her nose into the trim of her parka, transforming into something akin to Kenny from South Park. Ma didn't let her watch South Park, said it ain't no show for no good girl to watch, said she'd whip her ass she ever caught her watching that devil show again. Never mind was Donnie who showed her in the first place, but nobody ever whipped Donnie, none did they. A runny nose was something little kids got, and Bloomington had to don a veneer of professionalism. As a senior magical girl in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, she could not gallivant in front of the new kids sniffling and shivering like a mewling runt. It 10 minutes to reach the project where Woodbury lived. Thank God Woodbury did not actually live in Woodbury, or they might have some fucking problems. They both lived in Brooklyn Park, which fell under the jurisdiction of neither of them. In metro areas where territory got jammed together and borders were transient, girls lived either where their family lived or, lacking a family, where rent was cheapest. As long as they hunted in their own territory, nobody gave a shit where they slept, usually. Bloomington approached the apartment complex, its geometric and uninspired architecture riddled with graffiti, gang signs, names of local hotshots who flipped coke / crack / weed / pills on the corners and reinvested their earnings into solid gold crosses to hang from their necks. In the cold, at least, no loiterers hung around the entrance to ask where she from or if she tryna buy / sell. She sidled close to the flickering light over the door and rang the buzzer. The apartment door swung open immediately and Woodbury emerged in hot pink cotton ball apparel, her normally slight self turned three-dimensional by the layers of puffy jackets and mittens and scarves that adorned her. Bloomington forced down a wave of self-consciousness at her own clashing and obviously hodgepodge winter wear, and then squashed it with self-satisfaction. It was no secret how Woodbury made her money.
Hiya, Bloom.
Woodbury fiddled with her mittens as she led the way back down the street.
Geez Louise, it's cold tonight, don't cha think? Like, brr.
She added an exaggerated shiver for emphasis.
Yeah,
said Bloomington. All the money Woodbury made meant nothing because she still had to live in the one apartment block in the city where the landlord gave few enough shits to take rent from a preteen. All these out-of-town girls lately. Used to be you weren't a Minneapolis girl unless you actually, came from Minneapolis. But Auntie M had hired chicks over the internet, so now they had girls from all over. Woodbury was from Chicago. The other two new girls were Canadian, and who knew where St. Paul was from? It made Bloomington anxious. Like the old guard was getting phased out. All these new girls so quick, and all girls nobody had ever heard about either. Only Bloomington, Ramsey, and the Big M herself had been around half a year ago.
So glad I don't gotta hunt tonight,
said Woodbury. Mostly talking to herself, Bloomington supposed.
Ain't you glad you don't gotta hunt tonight? Can't imagine what it's like when the blizzard hits. What ya guys do then? You go out and hunt in the blizzard. Not like your soul takes a snow day. Dem ain't looking forward to that, but I guess what you gotta do. How you looking on cubes, by the way? It's been a little touch and go out in Woodbury, but I done well enough. Things good at the mall. I manage.
Bloomington suppressed the desire to wipe the snot dangling from her nose. She tilted her head so Woodbury would not notice.
That's nice, according to Cube we're not supposed to really hang out much, but I always thought that was dumb. We should really try to work together and keep an eye on each other. Don Cha think things would be better like that? If we worked together and helped each other out. More likely we'd kill each other,
said Bloomington.
In Chicago they don't do it like this,
Woodbury continued, as if she had not heard.
In Chicago they have it all ordered and tiered, and there's this hierarchy, and you gotta report to your superior officer and they take a percent as tribute or whatever. I thought all that was frankly a load of bull, which is why I came here, but this is like the total opposite spectrum. I hardly ever see any of you, and it was a big surprise when Minneapolis called to say she wanted to talk. You know why she wants to talk, by the way.
They reached the bus stop, a grim bench under a lopsided awning with a little light to look halfway legitimate. A hobo wrapped in rags dozed under the bench. He muttered in his sleep. The bus was due in 5, which meant 10 minutes of waiting in the frigid cold. Bloomington tapped her foot and fished a pack of cigarettes from a pocket. At least with her mitts forgotten, she dodged the hassle of taking them off to light up. A click on the lighter, a warm orange glow, and a satisfied puff to fill Bloomington with the nicotine that warded her from worse vices. Plus a small flare to defrost her blue lips.
Not sure, she answered finally. She said it was a security matter. Citywide security matter.
Woodbury's eyes were galvanized to the flare of the cigarette. Bloomington could tell she teetered on the cusp of asking for a light. She took another long drag, daring Woodbury to ask, to plead, to beg. But she did not ask.
Citywide security matter sounds pretty serious. You think it's one of those infestations people talk about sometimes? With the strong wraiths that take teams of girls to take down.
Another drag. Denying Woodbury the pleasure of smoking felt better than smoking itself.
Nah. Probably a nomad outstepped her bounds. Happens time to time. Or, said Woodbury, maybe it's a turf war? The Chicago girls always talked about conquering Milwaukee or Indianapolis or someplace. You think maybe they decided to come here? Probably a nomad.
Woodbury tilted her head quizzically, her nose improbably and infuriatingly devoid of dribbling snot.
Like a crazy nomad? Think we'll have to call in a what's it? Terminatrix, said Bloomington. I dunno. Possible. Wow, that's kinda scary, said Woodbury. Crazy to think there's girls who go around killing other girls. You would think with as much as we go through we'd, unite? Against our common foe? Why's it always gotta be drama and politics and stuff like that?
Were her eyes fixed on the cigarette or Bloomington's runny nose? Now Bloomington was paranoid. She dropped the cigarette prematurely and crushed it into the slush. She heard the bus before she saw it. Its wire squeal sliced the silence of the night, causing both Woodbury and the hobo under the bench to jump. From around a dilapidated old warehouse the illuminated billboard turned, its great glass windows revealing an emptiness inside Bloomington disliked, since it meant Woodbury would plug the silence with her own voice. They were the only ones on the bus. The raccoon-eyed driver barely acknowledged their presence as they took their seats. Woodbury smiled at him and asked if this line went to Eden Prairie, and the driver blinked and told her to sit down. The bus was as cold as outside.
So it's just us two,
said Woodbury, since Woodbury had to say something.
What about the others? Hennepin and Ramsey got better shit to do. Anoka says she's tied up.
Woodbury frowned.
I think Anoka's having a hard time adjusting. I'm worried she won't last long.
Hard time adjusting. Worried she won't last long. As if Woodbury were some wizened veteran.
Anoka's a garbage magical girl. Her powers are worthless. I got no clue why hired her. I wish there was some way we could help,
said Woodbury.
Worry about yourself. We got enough on our plate. Anoke'll be gone in a month and we'll get a better replacement.
Woodbury bit her lip and shut up for a merciful moment. The cheer drained from her cheeks and Bloomington immediately felt like an asshole for exploiting the fears of an 11-year-old fresh off contract. But hey, that's life. Bad magical girls die, and they do it pretty fast. The sooner Woodbury learned, the better. The ramshackle housing complexes and boarded-up storefronts gave way to cleaner and better-lit suburban agglomerations. Most of Greater Minneapolis-St. Paul fell in the above-average median household income range, and scuzzy ghettos like the one in which Bloomington and Woodbury resided were the exception rather than the rule. When they reached Eden Prairie, Bloomington tugged the cord on the bus. The driver seemed not to notice the call to stop, so she tugged harder. With a lazy flop of his head, the driver twisted the steering wheel and nearly ran the bus against the curb.
How far's her house from the bus stop?
Asked Woodbury as they disembarked.
This is a nice neighborhood, whose territory is this again?
Quiet, said Bloomington. They penetrated the outer ring of whitewashed houses with their Christmas lights and lawn reindeer, each house aflame in its hearth, each house a yellow light in its window. Despite the light, the world was no warmer here than it had been where they came from. Scattered snowflakes dropped from the sky, but did not stick to the sidewalk. At the end of an inner coil of road, far from the bus stop, a wrought iron gate rose to bar their path. Manicured topiaries lined the gate as it extended in both directions from the road, eventually disappearing behind more of the same suburban dwellings they had seen since they left the bus. Sharp spade tips topped the gate. In front stood a sign, Eden Estates.
Oh shit!
Woodbury covered her mouth to stifle a squeal.
Lives in there? Hot damn, that's crazy, that's so crazy. I knew she had money, but damn. I said quiet.
Bloomington did not like to attract attention in this part of town. With a glance over her shoulder, she approached the keypad near the gate and punched the code. Her numb fingers bludgeoned the numbers in sloppy succession. The gate opened like goddamn Jurassic Park, with the same ominous moan. Bloomington slipped inside, keeping her head down and her shoulders slumped in a way she knew only made her look more suspicious. If she stood straight and walked like she belonged, she would have an easier time, but the whole gated community gave her a bad vibe, its insular nature somehow a tangible reality of the space it occupied rather than a byproduct of a small metal fence. The houses, taller and with more stories, with more lighted windows, deepened her own insignificance and unease. The ostensibly friendly Christmas decorations did not help. Woodbury seemed not to mind, enraptured by the opulence of the community, her head swiveling from side to side to take in every identical house, every piece of neon holiday kitsch.
There,
said Bloomington. She pointed to a house alike all the others, with no particular importance to its location or the quantity of Yuletide cheer heaped upon its lawn. Despite her stoic bravado and cool mentor demeanor, she had only been here once before, after the old Minneapolis got ousted.
Ooh,
said Woodbury as they tromped up the porch.
Nice place. Let me do the talking.
Bloomington took a deep breath and rapped her knuckle against the solid oak door, eschewing the brass knocker. She scraped her boot soles against the welcome mat while she waited. A shadow flashed over the peephole. Please be M. Please not any weird family member. Please be M. The door opened. It was not M. It was a housewife in oven mitts and apron, her short auburn hair puffy and billowy, her ensemble lacking only a hot tray of fresh cookies that, from the smell wafting from the kitchen, they were a few minutes shy of seeing. M's mother's eyes lit up and her mouth curled into a delighted circle and she said,
"Oh my! You must be collecting for the local charity."
"No," said Bloomington. Woodbury shuffled uncomfortably and Bloomington glared to enforce the no-talking rule.
"We are friends of your daughter. Is she home?"
For a moment the aproned lady eyed them. Her expression betrayed neither scorn nor mistrust. It maintained the same placid politeness with which she had greeted them, the same saccharine cherubim smirk etched upon her bubbly features. From somewhere in the inner chambers of the home emanated the sounds of the same Vikings game that had played in Bloomington's house.
"Which daughter?"
said M's mother. Shit. Bloomington had totally forgot M had a sister. She tried to remain calm as she delved deep for M's real name. It started with a cuss sound. Kelly? BZZRT, wrong, try again. Cora? Clara? Clara sounded close, but also wrong. Should she try it or? Woodbury stepped in.
Claire, she said. We're friends of Claire. Is she home, Mrs. Ibsen?
The nice mask on Mrs. Ibsen's face evaporated into genuine warmth. She smiled broadly and laughed.
Claire's friends. Claire always has such nice friends. Please, do come in, make sure to wipe your boots on the mat. Claire will be thrilled to see you, absolutely thrilled.
An oven timer dinged as Mrs. Ibsen lured them inside with offers of chocolate chip cookies. The interior of the Ibsen household remained unchanged since Bloomington's previous visit. Everywhere were birds. Birds on wallpaper, birds on carpeting, birds in paintings, little wooden birds on mantelpieces, live squawking birds in cages. Sparrows, blue jays, condors, falcons, goldfinches, albatrosses, cardinals, kiwis, roosters, parrots, cockatiels, cockatoos, any and all avian species large and small. When Mrs. Ibsen shuffled to the kitchen and opened the oven, a phoenix adorned the cookie tray beneath the lumps of batter. A hummingbird pattern covered her apron, her mitts were embroidered with pelicans. She scraped the cookies off the tray with a spatula and placed them on peacock plates which she proffered Bloomington and Woodbury as though the rules of hospitality would be irrevocably violated lest they consume at least 5. In the adjacent family room a focused and balding Mr. Ibsen leaned forward on a gooseprint sofa to observe the Vikings lose in pixel-perfect detail on a full 1080p high-definition big-screen television mounted to the wall between an ostrich-shaped end table and a framed certificate of academic excellence awarded to Claire Ibsen by the governor of Minnesota.
No cookies, please, said Bloomington. We just want to speak to Claire.
Woodbury had already scarfed down at least 3 cookies. She started to ask if they had any milk but Bloomington elbowed her hard in the ribs.
Well, if you insist,
said Mrs. Ibsen.
Our daughters never eat them, so there's nobody else but hubby and me.
Mr. Ibsen grunted assent as his wife ferried him a plate. He shot up with a spastic, malformed cheer as the Vikings scored a field goal. With the parents distracted, Bloomington nudged Woodbury and led her upstairs. In the inner sanctum of the house, the bird motif grew less pronounced. The tacky paintings and knickknacks gave way to framed photographs of the Ibsen family. Mostly M at recitals, M receiving awards, M looking pretty in front of a nebulous blue background. Very few photos of the other Ibsen child. Although Bloomington had only been in the household once, she could tell which closed door led to M's room because of the music. A faint classical overture probably by some dude with Vaughn in his name percolated from behind the featureless door at the end of the hall.
That's her, right?
Woodbury whispered.
Best to let her finish, said Bloomington.
They waited in the hallway. Bloomington suppressed the urge to smoke and Woodbury pretended to admire the portraits. The music transmogrified from a soothing summer waltz to something more frantic, more intense. The violin that had formed the sole meandering note of the more pleasant movement erupted into an entire orchestra of sound, many instruments at once detectable even to Bloomington's admittedly troglodyte ears, although to be fair she had once listened to a Bach track on YouTube in a bout of shame at her lack of culture, pounding drums, crashing cymbals, booming organs, screeching clarinets, dying flutes. All harnessed by a madcap conductor, careening off whatever rails into an avalanche valley of jagged rocks and creeping lichens. The music exploded on impact in a final, brief flurry of activity, in complete unraveling of order or reason, and then only the lone violin remained, pealing the same summer overture as before, note for note. Then it too went silent. A voice from the other side of the door said, "You may enter now." Woodbury and Bloomington exchanged a glance and Bloomington opened the door. Claire Ibsen, alias Minneapolis, also known as Auntie M and a plethora of similar endearments, stood in the center of a sterile white space, between a perfectly made bed and a desk devoid of even marginal clutter. She wore her Navy prep school uniform, the only color in the room beside her red eyes and the mahogany of her violin. The distinctive, external, feature of Minneapolis, which everyone noticed but nobody mentioned, was her albinism. Bloomington had not known it was possible for white people to be albinos, but Minneapolis's matching skin and hair tone left little doubt. Minneapolis took the violin from her shoulder and placed it and its bow back in its case, which she promptly sealed with careful and efficient motions. She placed the case on the shelf next to the cases of all her other instruments and at no time established eye contact with her guests.
"Welcome," she said. "Please, take a seat."
She motioned to her bed, but Bloomington remained standing. It seemed somehow wrong to wrinkle the immaculate surface of blankets and pillows. Woodbury had no scruples and plopped her ass down. She folded her leg and wrapped her hands around her shoe.
Wow, that was a really great song, Really great. You did it all yourself, right? With magic?
Yes, said Minneapolis.
That's so cool. I wish my magic could do cool stuff like that. By the way, why isn't St. Paul here? I thought she'd be here for sure, she's always around wherever you are. I have already briefed St. Paul,
said Minneapolis. Bloomington tapped a foot, but stopped when she realized she was indenting the carpet.
Then brief us and let's get it done with. I got stuff to do. Of course. I would not want to inconvenience you more than necessary. Are either of you thirsty, perchance? I can procure a drink if needed.
Minneapolis kept her head slightly tilted in her well-practiced trick to avoid looking people in the eye. The obvious assumption was she felt ashamed of her red eyes, but Bloomington wasn't sure.
We're fine,
she said before Woodbury could answer.
Come on, skip the pleasantries already, we get it. You didn't call us over if it wasn't important. Weren't important,
said Minneapolis.
The conditional phrase requires the subjunctive tense. Okay, Herr Gestapo. If I were truly a Gestapo, I would not have allowed two girls of your skin tone into my city.
Minneapolis shifted her red eyes slightly closer to their direction.
But to the crux of the matter. Are we getting a new girl?
Said Woodbury. The bed springs squeaked beneath her. Minneapolis betrayed the beginnings of a smile.
In a sense.
She drifted to her desk and pressed a finger to the keyboard of her computer. The pure black screensaver disappeared and a single image replaced it. It was a picture of a run-down street in a small-time Midwestern town. Obviously a main street, and yet the buildings did not grow above 2 stories. A few rusted wagons, even a tractor, parked on the curb. In the center stood a lone girl, the only human being in the picture. She was crooked, lanky, her back stooped, her scraggly hair hanging in clumped strands. Her face scowled, her raccoon eyes watched over her shoulder at the nothing behind her, so as not to see the nothing ahead of her. Her hands were entrenched in the pockets of the long brown coat that swallowed most of her body. Of the 7 girls in Minneapolis, only 3 had been around when this girl reigned over the city. Bloomington was one of those girls.
Sloane Redfern.
A real name she had no trouble remembering.
Her moniker of choice nowadays is Fargo,
said Minneapolis.
Who's this?
Said Woodbury.
Who's Sloane Redfern? I thought Fargo was a movie? Is she one of those, She is not a Terminatrix.
Minneapolis remained rooted to the spot by the computer, her eyes lost in the image. The starched blue of her uniform, with its tie and modest skirt, gave her the appearance of a statue. Chiseled marble rather than human flesh.
She is the one who took the name Minneapolis before me.
Woodbury scratched her head.
So she's dead. She is not dead. 9 months ago, I was Fargo's right-hand woman and served in St. Paul for her. Our arrangement began amicably and we were close friends. Unfortunately, power corrupted her.
Minneapolis turned away from the screen, to the pitch black of her window. Only the jagged limb of a white tree stood outside it, like a long sharp crack in the glass.
She became increasingly obsessed with destructive pursuits for her own gain. She used human beings as bait to draw more wraiths. She grew hostile toward her fellow magical girls. On one occasion she lashed out and struck me. She struck others. She wished for their deaths, threatened them if they got in the way of her pursuit of cubes. Bloomington can corroborate my story, yes.
Yeah, said Bloomington.
She was one nasty girl. While none of her actions, taken by itself, warranted termination, her downward trajectory could not be denied. She withdrew further and further from all around her. She refused to listen to my advice, or the advice of the other girls active at that time. She babbled about plans to reduce the girls in Minneapolis from 7 to 6 so she could take more territory for herself. I became concerned. When a nomad came here from Chicago, Fargo taunted the girl into a duel and killed her without mercy.
Well, said Bloomington.
That other girl was asking for it. Indeed. The incubator agreed, and after some deliberation decided not to mark Fargo for termination. But her violence had worsened drastically in a relatively short time. I knew that if left unchecked, she would eventually descend into full megalomaniacal insanity. Her only goals were more cubes and more territory. With all guiding forces in her life shut out, she had allowed her heart to darken even if her soul remained clean. I knew I needed to take action before tragedy occurred.
Minneapolis unlatched the window. An icy blast buffeted their faces, but Minneapolis did not even flinch. She opened a drawer on her desk and retrieved a single leather glove.
I consulted the incubator to ensure my plans were legal under his code for magical girl conduct. I made one more attempt to reason with Fargo. When she spurned me, I challenged her to a duel and defeated her.
She slid the glove onto her left hand. Its long black surface went up to her shoulder. She made a special care to slide each finger into its proper place.
My intention had been to strip her of her soul gem and deliver it to the incubator for termination, as is protocol when handling dangerous magical girls. But I found I could not. The defeated Fargo, lying helpless on the ground, did not beg for clemency, and yet I could not bring myself to kill her. I recalled images of a distant past in which we had been close friends. I failed to do what I had promised the incubator I would do. I let Sloane Redfern go.
Minneapolis extended her gloved arm out the window. In a flurry of flapping wings, a raven the size of a hawk alighted on her arm. Its talons hooked into the leather as it settled its wings and made a tentative caw. She tilted her ear close to the raven's beak. It swiveled its head nearly upside down and straightened its pinions.
My familiar reports no news,
said Minneapolis, as though Bloomington or Woodbury had the slightest conception of what might constitute news to her. She patted the raven on the head and whispered something to it. The raven clacked its beak, flapped its wings, and soared out the window. It left behind a few loose feathers, which floated to the carpet.
So what happened next, said Woodbury. You know, with the story and all.
With the same diligence with which she had put it on, Minneapolis removed the glove.
Sloane Redfern fled the city, almost completely consumed by despair. But she did not succumb. She fled to Fargo, west of here. And there, the incubator tells me, she plotted revenge. And now she's back,
said Bloomington.
For real. The situation is quite real. Fargo is returning. She has somehow purified her soul gem and intends to destroy me. And you want us to help you?
Bloomington folded her arms.
Exhorting you to that cause is the purpose of this meeting. Yeah, no thanks. I didn't get involved when you ousted her and I ain't getting involved now. Deal with your own shit.
Minneapolis picked up the feathers one by one and deposited them out the window. Despite the obscene chill, she watched the dark void for a moment before shutting it.
Fargo is a deranged and desperate individual. Do you believe, Bloomington, that once she has dispensed with me she will leave you unaccosted? You and Ramsay, being the only others around from those times, stand the most to lose. Good luck convincing Ramsay to pitch in either, said Bloomington. Keeping my head down and staying quiet has done well so far, I don't see why that's gotta change.
Woodbury, who had remained silent for more than she was used to, quit kicking her heels against the side of the bed and looked up.
I think I'd like to help. You would,
said Minneapolis.
The offer is entirely voluntary. I merely wish to convey to Bloomington the danger Fargo may pose to her. As one who has never encountered this girl before, you are in significantly lower risk of falling within the scope of her unremitting ire. Enlisting yourself to the task of stopping her places you in peril you would otherwise avoid. I wish to make that fact perfectly clear. I get it, said Woodbury. She stood up. Look, I think you're pretty cool, Minneapolis. Like, you don't get in my hair or meddle with me or do anything like the girls in Chicago did. I'd rather you be in charge here than some crazy bitch who kills people, and if that means fighting, then shit, what else I gonna do?
The stupid little brown noser. Could Woodbury be more naive? Bloomington watched Minneapolis's face for traces of a smile, but the girl had her stoic expressionlessness down pat.
Woodsy,
said Bloomington. She hoped the affectionate nickname might help pierce the girl's thick skull.
First fucking rule of magical girldom, don't get into fights with other fucking girls. You got no energy to waste on some bitch who drops no goddamn cubes. I think this is the right thing to do, said Woodbury.
She balled a fist before her hot pink puffball jacket and attempted to look heroic. It didn't work.
Minneapolis has been nothing but kind to me since I came here. Least I can do's repay the favor.
Bloomington kneaded her forehead. God fucking damn it.
I am thankful for your faith, said Minneapolis. I do not wish to dictate orders to my subordinates. The situation in Chicago is exactly what I seek to avoid. I want a peaceful, supportive environment for my girls. It is simply that, to maintain that peace, interlopers must be removed. I do not wish to embroil you in a personal conflict, this goes beyond a mere grudge between Fargo and myself. I fear for the stability of this city if Fargo is allowed to take over. The city ran fine enough last time she had power here,
said Bloomington.
That is, because I managed the city when she, as was quite often the case, refused.
Even with Minneapolis's line of sight tilted slightly away from Bloomington's face, her red eyes could dig like daggers due to her poise, her composure, her elegant and measured voice, and the alienness of her albinism.
If you truly believe that Fargo on her own is competent to rule a city of this capacity, you are deluding yourself. Everything you say's got only your personal testimony to back it up,
said Bloomington. Minneapolis shut her eyes and exhaled softly.
Very well. I will make no further effort to change your opinion, Bloomington. As I said before, all contributions to the cause of defeating Fargo are voluntary. Woodbury, allow me to reiterate my gratitude for your support. I'll contact you soon with further orders once I receive more information on Fargo's whereabouts from my familiar. Until then, I shall detain you no longer. Farewell.
She did not reopen her eyes, emphasizing the finality of her words. Bloomington and Woodbury stood motionless for a few moments as if to ask if they should go or not, and Bloomington figured yeah they should go. It was clearly what M wanted and M tended to get what she wanted. They snuck out the house without another encounter with Mrs. Ibsen, although they did catch sight of what may have been Minneapolis's sister stealing Sasquatch-like between rooms.
You're just afraid,
said Woodbury as they trekked through the winter wasteland.
We owe it to M to help her. We don't owe her shit. What's she do for us? She works her territory, we work ours. I talk to her once a week if that. It's not like here in Chicago,
said Woodbury.
It's not like here in Law or New York. We got a good thing here.
Bloomington fished for another cigarette and lit it. The foolishness of youth, rushing headlong into death for no damn reason. The same spark that made men enlist for wars, she supposed. She tried to think up more arguments to sway Woodbury back to the smart side, and thought up a ton, but Woodbury made clear her mind was not changing. She skipped down the sidewalk in her cute pink boots humming some delightful tune, totally oblivious to what she had signed up to do. The dumb idiot. Bloomington flicked her light and crushed it. Someone oughta make sure Fargo don't blast her to bits. She looked around the desolate suburban roadside and grimly noted there was only one somebody around who could do that, and that somebody happened to be Bloomington. Chapter 15, A Broken Coriolanus. The modern miracle of GPS. A tiny handheld device harnesses the power of satellites to detect its location anywhere in the world, and then references that location against an accurate street network to determine the quickest route to anywhere one desires. As a computer voice lady announced directions from Delaney Pollock's phone, how she had missed her dear phone inside the signal-scrambling miasma, she and her best friend Sloane Redfern blazed across leagues of skinless countryside. Only 12.7 gajillion miles until you take the right junction in Minot. 12.7 gajillion miles of total and absolute silence. While best friend Sloane Redfern stared out the window and refused all eye contact. Where Olive Branch attempts at conversation fell limp and dead like Erica de Fresney's tiny cold body. You know what they say, an idle mind is the devil's playpen. The platitude had proven true for Delaney on too many occasions. Normally, though, when she thought absolutely crazy and depraved thoughts, there was nobody around for her to play them out upon. Now, though. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. So Sloane had spurned her advance in the motel room. Come on, that's totally fair. Totally. You're kind of great at batshit, remember? But Sloane's vulnerable state had led you to believe you had a chance. That's exactly the point. You completely misread the situation. You thought death equal emotion, emotion equal vulnerability, vulnerability equal need for comfort equal sex. A simple formula that probably works in a variety of easily replicable contexts, but Delaney had underestimated just a wee bit the death part of the equation, the fact that someone had died and that was not normally the best omen to hang over a rite of fertility. So ultimately all you did was reveal your insanity and ruin any chance you had, any at all. Fuck you, Delaney. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. But she could only distract herself with self-loathing for so long. Soon her thoughts verged on more sadistic pleasures. Like how easy her barriers could restrain Sloane. Thoughts of blindfolds, ball gags, leather straps, shiny metal instruments. Thoughts that made her squirm in her seat. Images of Sloane's destroyed and mutilated body, a plaything for Delaney's desire. God, it was so wrong. Delaney knew it was wrong but thought it anyway, which was all the worst. Once upon a time, she had believed sex would bring her redemption. An act of pure love and devotion, meant to create pleasure instead of pain. If she could have it, it would counteract the awful, selfish things she had done. And then she had learned sex could be just as selfish, just as painful as all her other perversions. Thanks, Internet. She checked the phone. The gajillions of miles had not changed. She needed to stop thinking these things or she would do something bad, either to Sloane or to herself.
If you don't want to be friendly, love, then let's talk strategy. You intend to roll into Minneapolis, gun this Ibsen girl down, and that's that? You think that'll work?
Sloane said nothing. Stared out the window. Cried out in muffled pain as Delaney leaned over the shredded ribbons of her back.
You lost to her before, why do you think you can beat her now?
More silence. More tightening, more asphyxiation.
Not to mention there's other girls in Minneapolis, right? It's a big city. They'll probably go against you too,
A split-open stomach, organs pressed into jars as offerings to false deities. Delaney wearing Sloane's skin like a jacket.
Come on, Sloane, love, please.
Delaney hunched over the steering wheel. She turned her strained face toward Sloane.
Say something, anything.
Briefly, an angel of mercy descended and Sloane said,
I'm not talking strategy because I haven't determined it yet. Hence the need to talk, love. I'm sure we'll concoct something devilish with the brainstorming we'd manage between here and Minneapolis. We'll knock Claire Ibsen's goddamn socks off.
She added a rousing fist pump for good measure. Sloane did not turn from the window. Her cheek would probably leave a greasy smudge.
I have to figure out the strategy. By myself.
Uh-oh. That sounded stupid.
And pray tell, love, why is that?
She said nothing.
I do hope you're not pulling one of those I gotta do this by myself, I can't take help from nobody routines. Because, frankly, that's really cliché. And also, you're already taking help from me, since I'm driving you.
Sloane unrooted from the window, and yes, she left a greasy smudge.
There's a difference between me telling you what to do and you telling me what to do. Claire did not have a brainstorming session with Omaha to figure out the Williston plan. Claire knew her plan was and got Omaha to do it. She reduced Omaha to a tool. The point of a tool is to know its function,
said Delaney. She tried not to attach any sexual connotations to the word tool and totally failed.
Make me a tool. Please. But know my function. Maybe you don't know this, since I dislike tooting my own horn, but I am a being of exceptional intelligence. I have a mind for science, geography, mathematics, basically any and all disciplines. I let you come up with the plan and boom, I'm the one being used. I'm the tool.
It grew more and more difficult to maintain the pleasant smile. Delaney struggled to believe Sloane could fall into this prideful logical pothole.
What is it you really want, Sloane love? Do you want Claire Ibsen dead, or is there something more at stake here? Because I'm a smidgen confuzzled.
Sloane stared forward. Chaff, barbed wire, and oil drills whizzed past her head.
Let me make my goals perfectly clear, then. I must defeat Claire Ibsen on my own merit. If Kyubey himself showed up and told me the cheat code to beat her, I wouldn't listen. I need to do it.
Delaney nodded, as though this were perfectly reasonable, when really it was dumb.
I see. So you don't really have to kill Claire, do you? You really want to reassert your superiority. Defeat her in a test of wits and power. There's no need for all-out murder, right? No. She must die. Yes, of course.
Delaney considered something else to say, but Sloane returned her forehead to the smudge on the window. She had seen enough movies to know pride was tricky to dance around. Egos were so easily bruised. It would not do for Delaney to force the issue, but no way could she allow Sloane to come up with the whole attack on Minneapolis plan herself. No offense, Sloane, but you're kinda dumb? Really, Delaney meant that in the least demeaning way possible. A lot of people are dumb. In fact, Delaney had not met a single living thing besides Kyubey who she considered less dumb than herself. But it was true. Claire Ibsen had masterminded some interesting shenanigans with Omaha, so Delaney knew she was nobody with which to trifle. And here was Sloane, trifling. Handicapping herself. First allowing Omaha to live, and then refusing to use Delaney, like a tool. Maybe deep down, Sloane did not want to actually kill Claire. Was this her subconscious acting up? That would make Delaney's task easier. Oh. Oh dear. Delaney had let the conversation die. Damn it. She did not know how to get someone to talk who did not want to talk. She practiced so hard to get people to like her, smile, say nice things, be an attractive female, and then they up and disliked her anyway. It perplexed her to no end. The moment she thought she had consumed enough movies to understand and replicate how normal people acted, some monkey wrench pinwheeled into her complex machinery and goofed it all up. Well, Delaney. Normal people don't think such depraved things about their friends. Oh, shut up. A large sum of mental fortitude ferried them to the North Dakota-Minnesota border without a lapse in Delaney's shoddy impulse control. Yay, congratulations Delaney. You gained a level in not being a total lunatic. However, night had fallen. Blame it on their late start, because Delaney had not dipped below 80 since Williston.
Sloan love, what ya say about a bite to eat? Maybe a little shut-eye,
They had entered a city the name of which Delaney had missed in the swift setting of dusk. But it seemed substantial enough to sleep in. For the second time during the drive, Sloan removed her filthy face from the passenger window. Delaney expected resistance, but surprisingly Sloan said,
"Sure. I don't intend to roll into Minneapolis looking like a slob anyway."
"Fabulous," said Delaney.
"But of course, food first. Sleep later. What kind of cuisine have you a palate for, love? I'm paying."
Sloan rubbed her eyes and blinked. She examined the depressing little houses alongside the road. Without warning, she began to laugh. Another caprice of the unknowable Sloan Redfern.
"What's so funny, love? We're in Fargo."
They ground to a halt at a stoplight which was red, although they were the only car at the junction. Delaney consulted the cyber lady in her cell phone.
"Well, I suppose that's true. Is it a problem? We can press for the next town if you like." "I don't give a fuck,"
said Sloan.
"This place means nothing to me."
They ate at a roadside diner, one of a million anonymous locales speckled across the offspring of American manifest destiny. Sloan ordered a burger and fries. Delaney got a chicken fried steak. She let the meal simmer before springing her trap on Sloan.
"So you've had some time to think about the plan, right?"
Gobble crunch swallow.
"Yeah." "Great. Let me hear it. I'm waiting to be ordered, Commander."
She threw in a smart salute, careful to tread the line between endearment and irony. Sloan wiped her mouth on a napkin.
"The city of Minneapolis has a population to support 7 full-time girls. Bloomington, Woodbury, Hennepin, Ramsey, Anoka, St. Paul, and Minneapolis." "I see. St. Paul is a big city, so it also needs a strong magical girl. The other 5 are mostly suburbs, so you get your usual suburban types, met potential, little ambition. But St. Paul is an asset most big city girls don't have. A right hand, a strong lieutenant. When I ruled, Claire Ibsen was my St. Paul. She's probably found a suitable replacement. So we'll have to watch out for this St. Paul, you think?" "Yeah. The other 5 girls will be non-factors. Suburb girls are glorified courtiers. Either they won't help Claire or they won't be a threat. Some are probably the same girls around when I ruled. If that's the case, I know they're worthless." "So you're saying there's one big unknown, and that's St. Paul?"
Chunash gulp.
"One unknown we know about. Claire is resourceful. She gets people to like her. You saw Omaha expect stuff like that." "Is Claire really that smart?"
said Delaney. Not that she doubted. She wanted Sloan to open up, and since Claire Ibsen seemed to be her solitary train of focus, it felt like the best approach. Sloan slurped the straw of her vanilla milkshake.
"I'll answer that with as emphatic a yes as you like. Do you know what she wished for? During her contract? I want you to guess. Guess what she wished for." "I dunno. I assume it wasn't a puppy."
Sloane's eyes narrowed, but she ignored the comment.
"She wished she could feel no despair."
It took Delaney only a moment to comprehend the ramifications of such a wish, but Sloan had such a self-satisfied look that Delaney gave a few extra seconds of contemplation to allow her fun.
"That means her soul gem never gets tarnished." "It would have meant that, at least," said Sloan. "Cube refused to grant it. We didn't know at the time, or I didn't know, but a wish like that would undermine Cube's whole reason for contracting us in the first place. No despair means no energy. He gave some dickering bullshit reason why he couldn't grant it and settled on a compromise instead. Which was, she can never feel total despair," said Sloan. "Her soul gem gets dirty when she expends magic, or when she has a bad day, I guess. But it'll never break like that. She's immune to the law of the cycles.
Delaney had to concede that was a pretty good wish.
Right,
said Sloane.
but think about it. How many girls have you met who made a good wish? Nobody ever makes a good wish. It's like an unwritten law, if you're a magical girl your wish has to suck. Even if you think you're thinking your wish through, you're seeing it from every angle, you're wrong. Nobody who wants something when they're 13 still wants it in a year. But that's the thing. She didn't make a wish about something she wanted. She made a wish solely to power up.
Pretty unusual, said Delaney.
I'm sure it has precedent, though. It makes no sense to me.
Sloane's half-eaten burger waved in her hand.
Somehow people love her, people flock to her. All her flaws are endearing. She's cold, emotionless, aristocratic, and yet she has these glimmers of approachability that make you feel special, like she's only so harsh with everyone else and she's granting you private access into her real self. She never looks you in the eye but it comes off as bashful rather than rude. She's an albino, but it only makes her prettier. An albino?
said Delaney.
You know, white hair. Red eyes. I thought only black people can be albino, but I guess not. I know what's an albino. Point is, she doesn't make sense. She has this high society vibe that should feel pedantic and pretentious but...
Delaney hemmed.
When I asked about her, I suppose I wanted to know about her combat abilities. Right.
Sloane finished her hamburger with 2 enthusiastic bites.
She uses music as magic. Plays instruments. That kind of thing. So if we wear earmuffs we'll be okay. It doesn't work like that. She affects the world around her with her music, like a wraith miasma. Her raw power is pretty underwhelming, but she does stuff you don't expect. You'll see when we fight her.
Delaney swirled her fork around the chopped bits of her steak. She scrunched her mouth.
I'd kinda like to know before we fight her. It's a little important to prepare for battles like these. I can't be more specific because she's not like me,
said Sloane.
She doesn't just shoot you or do the same thing over and over. She'll pull out a different instrument and play a different tempo and do something totally different. She always has new tricks up her sleeve. It's been 7 months, I don't expect her to be using the same abilities she used against me.
It did not appear Sloane had anything more specific to add. Delaney liked Sloane's self-appointment as tactical leader even less now that she had seen her in action. Vague postulations, unclear descriptions, pointless information. No clear focus. No clear plan. Oh well. Up to Delaney to surreptitiously puppeteer Sloane's path from the shadows. Which basically everyone else was already doing, and Sloane hadn't the faintest inkling of her true plight.
So shall we attack at night, love?
said Delaney.
Seems to me a quick and direct confrontation is our best hope. The more time we give this Claire girl to prepare, the more problems we'll face. Oh yeah.
Sloane seemed to remember the original thrust of the conversation.
Yeah, that. Right now it's best to assume Claire knows we're coming. With Claire we have to assume she knows stuff, rather than not knowing. Okay then.
This chicken fried steak was not as appetizing as Delaney had hoped.
So we assume Claire knows you're coming, she knows when you're coming, and she knows I'm coming with you. What do we do about that?
Sloane remembered something else.
I got a plan. Gimme your phone.
Delaney shuffled through the pouch of her hoodie and deposited her phone on the table between the plates. Sloane wiped her hands on her napkin and examined the device for a few uncertain moments.
Okay, now bring up a map of Minneapolis.
Delaney tapped her phone and typed something on the screen and the small backlit display zoomed to the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area.
Okay so.
Sloane leaned forward to examine the small map.
Claire's territory is the inner part of the city, next to St. Paul, with the suburban girls in a ring around her. A buffer. So we would have to go through the territories of multiple girls to get to her. Not quite. Because Claire hunts in Minneapolis, but she lives here.
Sloane poked the screen, which caused it to zoom in, which was apparently not what she wanted because she attempted to unpoke it unsuccessfully until Delaney returned the map to its previous extent.
Here,
Sloane said, not quite touching the screen this time.
Eden Prairie. It's a suburb in Hennepin's territory. You can see it's not as central as Minneapolis.
Delaney spun her phone around and took a look at the map.
You're right, it's not such a long trek to get to this Eden Prairie place. And we'd only have to go through one other girl's territory? If we take this highway...
Sloane slammed her hand down on the table. The plates rattled and the nebulous other customers glanced up for a brief moment before returning to their fare.
Aha! But that's the point. That's the most obvious route, from the west. It's the most direct. Which is why it's exactly where Claire would expect us to go. See, with Claire, you gotta think one step ahead.
The map of Minneapolis was your standard big city. You had your embryonic nucleus, around which quaintly named suburbs,
Eden Prairie, Coon Rapids,
clustered in borderless agglomerations. Highways encircled and pierced the city from every direction, making assault possible no matter the angle of entry. No oceans, lakes, or mountains adjusted the archetypal city layout. In fact, in many ways Minneapolis was too perfect, too textbook, with no distinguishing features at all. Its sole unique trait was that instead of one nucleus, one main city, Minneapolis had two. The less relevant but still major St. Paul had swelled in its mother's womb like a second, slightly stunted twin. Say, wasn't Sloane herself a twin? What a coincidence.
So,
Sloane continued,
I proposed we approach this way. From the north, through the territory of the girl Anoka.
The map did not include magical girl territorial boundaries, and Sloane did little to elucidate them exactly. Of course, knowing how magical girls operate, such boundaries had probably never been well defined in the first place.
Why Anoka?
Said Delaney.
It's only a slightly longer trip, it's less obvious, and Anoka is where the newest girl in town goes. It's the lowest rank on the totem pole. If Claire's got her girls on watch for us, we'll see the least resistance there.
Delaney leaned on her elbow. From her vantage, the way they approached this city was the least of their worries. But she supposed she ought to indulge Sloane, because at least the girl was talking now, warming to the prospect of Delaney as ally.
That's a great idea, love. We hit her where she least expects.
Unless Claire, not being an idiot, understood this northern territory was her weakest line of defense and bolstered it appropriately. Delaney found herself in a curious bind where she was expected to predict the actions and thought patterns of a girl she had never met, and for whom her primary source of intel lacked reliability and, let's be honest, intelligence. A waitress did a drive-by refill on Delaney's coffee. Delaney blew on it and slurped.
Okay, so that's a plan. We ought to talk about one other thing, love. What's that?
The bitter warmth of coffee filled Delaney's innards.
Your combat abilities. Don't get me wrong, your power is awesome, really cool. Perfect for wraiths. But you have to consider that your machine gun stuff's not so hot for magical girls.
Sloane continued to fiddle with the map on the cell phone.
It's fine for that, what are you talking about? Love, your power is great for wraiths because wraiths are slow, big, and legion. But most magical girls excel in speed, agility, dodging left and right, protecting themselves from strong attacks like the kind wraiths use. It's a totally different game. You can't go brute forcing everything anymore.
A bill had, as if by magic, manifested on the edge of their table. Delaney pretended to look it over as Sloane spent a long time before responding.
I'll be fine.
Delaney looked up from the bill.
Wrong answer, love. I do not think you truly understand what you're getting yourself into. I know better than you what Claire Ibsen can do.
Delaney opened her small pink handbag and paid in cash.
Light is a versatile and elemental magical power, she said. It's a shame you don't put it to better use. Like when you set that oil on fire during the Archon fight, remember that? That was great, that was brilliant. But you never do stuff like that. Do you have a finisher, anything else you can use besides just shooting people a lot? I have a finisher, yeah. Great. Tell me about it, love.
But Sloane shrugged.
It only works when the sun's out. Which happens maybe 2 times a year. So who cares?
Delaney considered the therapeutic potential of smashing her own skull against the hard restaurant table.
What about other things you can do with light? What if you could move at the speed of light? Look, Delaney.
Sloane slid her clean plate forward and stood.
I know my powers better than you. I know what I can do and what I can't. This conversation is a waste of time.
It took a lot of mental fortitude not to calmly explain to Sloane why she was stupid and also dumb, but Delaney managed it.
I'm trying to help, love. I'm your friend, after all.
Sloane's visage darkened. Delaney tried to parse the nuanced shifts in her weathered face, tried to apply all her studies of human psychology and social interaction to it. What could be the true underlying root of this idiocy? Because Sloane, while boorish, was not possibly so dumb to willfully refuse aid. Nor was she so prideful. Had she been, she never would have entered Delaney's jeep at all. Aha! Delaney knew the exact issue here.
You're mistrustful of friends because of what happened to your last friend, she said. Claire Ibsen's betrayal damaged you deeper than you know. You eschew my help because some part of you still thinks I intend to turn on you.
Sloane said nothing.
I'm right, I know it.
Delaney nearly clapped her hands with glee. So rarely did she understand people this well.
It has nothing to do with my goddamn injured subconscious, said Sloane, and everything to do with the fact you're a fucking psycho.
Now it was Delaney's turn to say nothing. She bit her lower lip.
Let's fucking go, said Sloane.
They went, ignoring a few odd stares from the other patrons of the diner. Since they had embarked on their journey so late, either Omaha had already returned to Claire Ibsen and told everything, or she would never return at all. Either way, the outcome was out of their hands, so no harm spending the night and ensuring they entered Minneapolis the next day healthy, wealthy, and wise. Sloane had been surprisingly receptive to the suggestion, which she explained as a need to clean herself up before she faced her arch-nemesis. Couldn't look like a shabby wreck, after all. An odd vindication, that even one like Sloane could succumb to vanity now and then. Which left Delaney in a situation not unfamiliar to her, lying on the bed of a cheap motel while Sloane spent forever locked in the bathroom, causing drought with how long she let the shower run. On one hand, the idea that a thin panel of wood was all that separated Delaney from Sloane's nude form ought to have driven her to unkempt thoughts, but the fact that Sloane was not actually in Delaney's field of vision actually made her much easier to forget. So much for Delaney's own nightly ablution she would have to wash in the morning instead. She stretched out on her bed, shoes already shorn, slipping between the dingy but comfortable covers. She let out a contented sigh. Despite the friction with Sloane, she had gone another 24 hours without a severe relapse to her crazy ways, and also killed an Archon, and also saved Sloane's life, and maybe some other stuff too. Things to be thankful for. The moment she closed her eyes, a voice invaded her head. We will probably not have another chance to talk after this. My employer is growing more watchful of the situation here. She is distracted for now, but will not be for long. She cracked one eye open. The incubator stared at her from the foot of her bed. Can't imagine you have much to say to me, considering in your plans I should be dead by now. Your life or death is irrelevant to my plans, said the incubator. Unlike Miss Erica, your odds of death were insufficiently high to rely upon its occurrence. But first, congratulations. You performed really well, Delaney. You did everything I needed you to do, with only minor and easily resolved setbacks. Delaney rolled over and burrowed her face in the pillow. Come on, Kyub. Be at least a little honest with me. You sent Omaha to kill me in Winnipeg, didn't you? I was aware of her presence and intentions. They didn't interfere with my plans, so I let her be. In fact, she has been particularly useful for confounding my employer as to the true nature of the goings-on here. She glanced up at his beady red eyes. Typical Kyubey. She asks a question, he gives an ambiguous response. Aware of her presence and intentions? Does that mean you sent her or not? With a sigh of defeat, she let the matter drop. When the incubator did not want to answer a question, he did not answer it. Okay, but you can't be serious when you say you don't care if I'm alive or dead. Sloane is too stupid to kill Minneapolis without me. Whether you want her to or not is a different story, but me being alive is going to affect that. You being alive will not affect my desired outcome. She sat up and almost answered aloud, but caught herself as her mouth opened. Lies, Kyubey. Total lies. Even if it's unlikely for Sloane to beat Claire Ibsen with or without me, I'm altering your probability somewhat. Somewhat. I know I am, I'm not that useless. You assume I care whether Miss Sloane kills Miss Claire or not. You also overvalue your worth, Delaney. While your assistance will be valuable to Miss Sloane, that assistance comes at the cost of depriving her of half the grief cubes dropped by the Archon, since you have used those cubes for yourself. The difference between a Sloane Redfern who is twice as powerful as she is now and a Sloane Redfern who has a Delaney Pollock at her side is not particularly relevant. Which was done by design. If I cannot sufficiently assume a variable to occur, for example your death or survival, the obvious course of action is to make that variable irrelevant. The only person who needed to die was Miss Erica, because she would have taken over half of the cubes for herself and left Sloane with too little to even purify her soul gem, thus making conflict between her and Claire Ibsen impossible. But Miss Erica's death was assured. Either the Archon would kill her, Omaha would kill her, or you would kill her. The combined probabilities all three of you had of killing her gave her a 0.002% chance of survival, low enough for it to be considered a certainty. Thus, I was able to use her death as a vital element of my plan. I do not roll dice, Delaney. Maybe it was the mention of a 0.00 something chance of something something, but Delaney felt she teetered on the precipice of one of the incubator's statistics lectures, which were not fun and which she did not want to hear. Or perhaps he had planned his speech to have that effect on her, so she would be less willing to probe deeper and question his methodology. Or see the central lie all this gobbledygook was meant to conceal. You know, she said, Winnipeg didn't have to die at all. She was going to give Sloane her fair share of cubes. I find that highly unlikely, given Miss Erica's well-established tendencies and temperament. Erica, Winnipeg, whatever, she and Sloane were pretty similar. Lonely kids who got hurt by the few friends they had. They needed someone they could trust. I conspired to have them trust each other by uniting them against a common bad guy, also known as me. Remember when I trapped Winnipeg with that worm wraith thing and attacked Sloane in the city hall? That was a pointless deviation from your orders, which were to kill Miss Erica only after she had helped defeat the Archon. In the bathroom, the shower finally turned off. Delaney estimated the time Sloane would spend primping herself. She would have to end her conversation soon, which she didn't mind, because it was clear the incubator's sole reason for talking to her was to confuse her. Before he left, though, she had a point to make. It wasn't a deviation. It was improvement. I created a scenario in which Sloane and Winnipeg worked together to survive, allowing them to build trust. By outing myself as particularly untrustworthy, they would be more likely to trust each other instead. Trust leads to friendship. Friendship leads to not being an asshole, which leads to Winnipeg giving Sloane a fair share of cubes. Then I pretend I'm dead and let them divide the cubes 50-50 and everything you want to happen happens except nobody dies. Pretty cool, hey? The incubator stared at her. I recommend avoiding so-called improvements in the future, he said. Your antics were an unnecessary if ultimately benign waste of energy. Furthermore, you of all people should not put much faith in your ability to understand the emotions of others. I have millennia of research on human behavior and psychology to inform my calculations and predictions, while you have little more than a few years of human media to draw upon. All this telepathy hurt her head. She wished she could open her mouth and really speak. She felt much more free when she spoke with her mouth instead of her mind, much more like herself. I may not be the best human, she said, but I still am one. Which means I'll know more about why they do what they do than you ever will. I find that claim dubious. We're actually a lot more alike than you think, Delaney. In fact, you are one of the few humans with whom I find conversation somewhat stimulating, although today you are more banal than usual. Can this conversation be over now, please? Okay. As long as in the future you remember not to make risky decisions based on your flawed knowledge of how regular humans operate. When I first began work here thousands of years ago, I made a lot of mistakes for exactly that reason. So treat this as friendly advice, rather than a warning. Delaney said nothing. Talking to the incubator was a physically draining experience. It hadn't always been. When she first contracted, she had found him the only being she could ever really talk to, confess her innermost thoughts and desires. And he had fed her such garbage, told her that her dark inclinations were the signs of one on the cusp of true enlightenment, ballooned her already overstuffed ego with his proclamations she was smarter, better than the 7 billion others of her ilk that infested the planet. She had enjoyed it because despite her intelligence she was actually an idiot, or at least naive. Now she overturned his every word in search of hidden meaning, wondered at every misdirection and sleight of tongue, tried to connect his meanings to uncover the motivations that lurked behind his blood-red eyes. Worst of all, like all bad drugs, she still needed him. Needed his promise that what she did here would both save the universe and the goddess that had created it from a demon hell-bent on its destruction, the thin thread that attached her desperately to her salvation, her atonement for the evils she herself had wrought. If his assurances of the ultimate goal of his plan turned out to be a lie. Wait, one last thing, said the incubator. As if he had forgotten until just now, although that was obviously impossible and merely an attempt to paint himself as fallible and reduce how much he intimidated her. I had to promise my employer I would hire a Terminatrix to eliminate both you and Miss Sloane. I'll be meeting with the girl in question shortly, so keep an eye out and don't get blindsided. Delaney mumbled an affirmative as the incubator slipped away, leaving her mercifully alone on the bed after the longest 48 hours of her life. She fell asleep before Sloane left the bathroom,